Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked. The choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The Great Hall is holding its breath. Candles hover, shadows flicker on ancient stone, and the Sorting Hat's brim bends over a bushy-haired girl who is trying very hard not to shake. For a heartbeat, we're back in canon, waiting for the familiar word. But the hat doesn't shout, Gryffindor this time. It whispers, almost conspiratorial, Ravenclaw. Hermione Granger freezes. Then she stands, cheeks flushed, eyes wide, and walks toward a table draped in blue and bronze. What if the smartest witch of her age never sat beneath red and gold banners? What if she never slid onto the bench beside a lanky redhead and a boy with a lightning scar? What if, on this first night, the girl who will one day brew polyjuice in the bathroom and punch Draco Malfoy in the face takes her place under an eagle instead of a lion? This changes everything. Not because Ravenclaw is better or worse than Gryffindor, but because one sentence from an old hat rewires 7 years of friendship, danger, and survival. At the Gryffindor table, Harry and Ron clap politely for the clever Muggle-born they met on the train, then realize she is not coming to sit with them. There's an empty space where, in canon, she would have been squeezed between them, framed by scarlet hangings and roaring banners, already correcting their pronunciation of Wingardium Leviosa. Instead, we see her slip onto the Ravenclaw bench, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. Terry Boot, Padma Patil, a flock of curious eyes assessing this girl who already memorized Hogwarts, a history. We see Professor Flitwick's delighted smile, the way he straightens a little taller as his new prize student joins his house. Up in the towers, the future shifts direction. No portrait hole, no password. Hermione will climb a different staircase, stand before an eagle-shaped knocker, and answer riddles at the door. How does it change her to be welcomed, not for courage, but for her mind first and foremost? This isn't a story about simply moving a color palette from red and gold to blue and bronze. It means that on the very first night, Hermione's desperate longing to belong hooks onto a different set of peers, a different common room, a different definition of brave. It means Harry, already aching with the shock of fame and the memory of a cupboard under the stairs, looks down the table and does not see the future anchor, who will drag him to the library and remind him he is more than a prophecy, who feels like an outsider now. In Gryffindor, Harry and Ron lean into each other a little more, two boys bound by shared bewilderment. In Ravenclaw, Hermione sits too straight, laugh a second too late, terrified that one wrong answer will prove she doesn't deserve to be there. The houses are the same, but because she is in a different tower, every small moment tilts. So, let's explore what that tilt does. Without Hermione at the Gryffindor table, what happens when the troll comes? Who solves the mystery of the stone, or deciphers the secrets of the chamber, or organizes the DA? From this first whispered Ravenclaw, we're going to follow a new timeline. One where every crisis at Hogwarts, from the bathroom troll to the Horcrux hunt, is rewritten by a girl who walks back to a different common room on her very first night. The one choice that changes everything. What if the smartest witch of her age never sat at the Gryffindor table at all? What if, in that humming great hall, when the sorting hat tipped over Hermione Granger's curls, its quiet debate ended with a different single word? In canon, we're told the hat hesitated. It saw the color-coded flashcards in her mind, the hunger for knowledge, the thrill she felt at a riddle with only one right answer. It weighed that against the girl who had memorized every rule, not because she was meek, but because she was already preparing to break them if she had to. Bravery versus intellect. Nerve versus nuance. In our timeline, it whispers Gryffindor and sends her toward the boys who will become her family. In this one, it leans into the other half of her and says, Ravenclaw. This changes everything. Not because Ravenclaw makes her better, or Gryffindor made her worse, but because where you sleep shapes who you talk to at midnight, whose crises you witness, whose secrets you keep. Canon Hermione becomes the trio's moral compass precisely because she is in their orbit from day one. The bossy know-it-all, who becomes the girl who will set a teacher on fire for them. A Ravenclaw Hermione still loves fiercely, still believes in rules as a way to protect people. But her first loyalties are braided through a different tower, different doormates, different casual conversations about homework and fear and home. Imagine first year with her climbing the spiral to Ravenclaw Tower, answering riddles at the door, trading revision tips with Terry Boot and Padma Patil instead of arguing with Ron over chess. She hears rumors about a three-headed dog and a nervous boy who lived from across the hall, not from the bed beside hers. When the troll comes, does she end up in that bathroom at all? If she does, who runs in after her? If she doesn't, who stands between Harry and a falling club? This isn't a story about making Harry and Ron helpless without their walking library. It's about tracing the very real ways delayed friendship can mean missed chances and sharper dangers. Because if Hermione is not at the Gryffindor table every evening, who notices the pattern in the library books about Nicholas Flamel? Who pieces together that basilisks travel through pipes, or that a diary can be more than a diary? She can still research from Ravenclaw, of course. She can still overhear, still worry, still push her way into their quests. But because her default is Ravenclaw debates about theory, not Gryffindor dares about action, each mystery becomes a little harder to solve, each crisis a little slower to recognize. There are socio-economic stakes hiding in this too. A Muggle-born girl in a tower famous for brilliance rather than bravery faces a different set of expectations and prejudices. Professors Flitwick and McGonagall pull her in different directions. Snape sees a Ravenclaw swot, not a Gryffindor interloper. The DA, the Time Turner, the Horcrux hunt, every one of those threads depends, more than we like to admit, on where one anxious 11-year-old hangs her robes at night. So, let's explore an alternate timeline where the war's outcome might hinge on a single whispered choice and a different common room door clicking shut behind Hermione Granger. Hermione reframed from Gryffindor Lionheart to Ravenclaw strategist. Hermione Granger, in this timeline, walks away from the Gryffindor table before she ever learns what it feels like to earn points for breaking a rule. In canon, her arc is a steady, painful education in controlled disobedience. First year, she's the girl who insists they'll be expelled, who thinks the rules will protect everyone if they're just followed precisely. By the time she's hexing Marietta Edgecombe and modifying her parents' memories, she's learned that sometimes bravery matters more than grades, that the letter of the law can be the enemy of the people it claims to protect. Her prefect badge is always in tension with her founding membership in the DA. But because the hat sends her to Ravenclaw, the feedback loop changes. The same traits that Gryffindor gently challenges: her bookishness, her need to be right, Ravenclaw affirms. She's not an insufferable know-it-all there. She's simply normal. The girl who reads ahead in every subject is no longer a punchline. She's a benchmark. This changes everything for a child who has built her worth on gold stars. Imagine Hermione in Ravenclaw Tower answering the Eagledor riddles with bright-eyed delight, earning quiet nods from older students and open praise from Flitwick. Every essay that exceeds the word count, every extra credit charm she masters, isn't met with eye-rolling but with admiration. What if the house itself tells her every day that the safest way to matter is to be the cleverest person in the room? That kind of validation makes her more confident academically, less brittle when she raises her hand, but it also slows her willingness to risk social or physical danger. Why charge after a troll when the sensible response is to fetch a professor? Why sneak out at night when you can outthink the problem from a well-lit desk? This isn't a story about Hermione losing her courage. It's a story about that courage being rerouted. Psychologically, the constant affirmation matters. In canon, being Muggle-born is a raw wound. She overcompensates with perfect marks because she fears being seen as an interloper. Under Flitwick's wing, with fellow Ravenclaws who admire her Muggle background as an intriguing data point rather than a stain, that insecurity softens. She is less desperate to prove she belongs to Hogwarts as a whole, but the anxiety doesn't vanish. It narrows. Now her terror is of being wrong in front of the people who have built her pedestal. A failed answer at the common room door, a miscast charm in front of Michael Corner, feels catastrophic. So her heroism takes a different shape. In Gryffindor, deprivation pushes her outward. Loneliness, fear of failure, the sting of social rejection all drive her toward those wild, lion-hearted leaps. In Ravenclaw, responsibility pulls her inward. If she understands the problem, she believes she must solve it. She joins the Stone investigation not because she's swept into adventure by two reckless boys, but because the logic of the clues keeps her up at night, and that sets up a quieter, sharper tension. Is Hermione braver when she's dragged into danger by lions who refuse to leave her behind, or when she's the lone voice in a tower of thinkers arguing that knowledge must become action? When we follow this Hermione through the Troll, the Chamber, and the DA, that question will haunt every choice she makes. 7 years, one change. How this AU will unfold. So if that question is going to haunt every choice, how do we actually follow it through 7 years of war, and homework, and house points? We don't jump around the timeline. We walk it, year by year. And we keep asking what changes when Hermione climbs the spiral staircase to Ravenclaw Tower instead of the Gryffindor dorms. We start with Philosopher's Stone because this isn't a story about abstract traits on a sorting hat chart. It's about a troll in the dungeons and a girl who isn't in the bathroom near two reckless Gryffindors. We'll track how the trio doesn't quite form that Halloween night, how the stone mystery unfolds when Hermione's research happens from a different table. and what it means when Harry and Ron have to cross the Great Hall to ask a Ravenclaw for help, rather than whisper across the fire in their own common room. Then we move into Chamber of Secrets, where this changes everything about the investigation. The diary still whispers. The basilisk still hunts. But because Hermione is entrenched in a house built on riddles, the research into pipes and something that kills with a glance happens amid eagle-shaped bookends and Flitwick's encouragement, not just whispered in the Gryffindor girls' dormitory. We'll look at what it does to her sense of safety when the girl who cracks the mystery is literally petrified in the library, separated from the boys, not just by stone, but by house. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the time-turner year bends into a different shape. We'll sit with the logistics, a Ravenclaw timetable already overloaded, Hermione vanishing between arithmancy, ancient rooms, and late-night riddle doors. Who notices first? McGonagall, who signed the form, or Flitwick, who sees the exhaustion in his star pupil? We'll trace how the secret of Sirius Black intersects with a Hermione who hears gossip from Terry Boot and Padma Patil, not Seamus and Lavender, and what that means when it's time to believe the impossible truth about the man in the Shrieking Shack. From there, each book becomes a new test. In Goblet of Fire, we watch a Ravenclaw-led investigation into the tournament, a different Yule Ball dynamic, a quieter but sharper jealousy. In Order of the Phoenix, we build a DA that might actually be headquartered in Ravenclaw Tower, shaped by blue and bronze strategy rather than red and gold defiance. Who joins when Hermione's the one sending owls from a different house? Who stays away? And through it all, we're not only chasing the big canon set pieces, we're paying attention to who Hermione studies with, who she sits beside at breakfast, which professors champion her. Does McGonagall still pull her aside with that fierce, proud look? Or does Flitwick become the adult who quietly protects her? How does eating under a ceiling of stars with Luna, year after year, change the way Hermione thinks about logic and love and war? By the time we reach the Horcrux hunt, the question won't just be whether they can win without a Gryffindor Hermione camping at Harry's side. It will be, what kind of war does a Ravenclaw Hermione fight, and who follows her into it? So, let's explore that new battlefield one school year at a time. The cost of blue and bronze. New hardships, new frictions, but a different battlefield means different wounds. It's tempting to imagine Ravenclaw Tower as a soft landing for Hermione. Books, riddles, professors who adore her essays. Safe, but because she's Muggle-born, that eagle's nest exposes her to a new, quieter edge of cruelty that canon never really had room to show. In Gryffindor, the prejudice is loud. Mudblood hurled across a corridor, Draco's drawl, Snape's silence. In Ravenclaw, it can be a raised eyebrow when she doesn't recognize a pure-blood surname. Or the way someone explains arithmancy theory with just a little too much patience. What if the house that worships wit also assumes that real cleverness comes from old families who've been reading ancient runes for generations? Hermione's perfect answers win points, yes, but they also win whispers. She's memorized. She's mechanical. She doesn't have the intuitive feel of someone who grew up with magic. This isn't a story about open bigotry alone. It's about the 1,000 tiny cuts of intellectual snobbery and classism. And then there's the politics. A Ravenclaw who keeps vanishing toward the fat lady's portrait. Who is always at the Gryffindor table? always in the orbit of the Weasley boy and the boy who lived. That looks to some of her housemates less like bridge building and more like disloyalty. Prefects wonder why she's spending late nights in another common room. Younger students watch her bolt from a Ravenclaw study group to chase Harry down a corridor and quietly decide she cares more about lions than eagles. This changes everything when the school starts to fracture. Umbridge arrives. The DA forms, a brilliant muggle-born in Ravenclaw, organizing secret lessons in defensive magic while publicly correcting professors and privately advising Harry Potter. That's a headline waiting to happen. Draco's taunts shift. Not just mudblood, but Ravenclaw thinks it's clever to arm the rabble. Later, the Daily Prophet doesn't have to stretch far to paint her as dangerous. Not only a student leader, but one with access to Ravenclaw's intellectual capital and increasingly its secrets. Because here's the uncomfortable part. That access works. Flitwick trusts her. The Riddle Door rewards her. The library is practically her second home. Her knowledge, power, and influence begin to outstrip even Harry and Ron's, not just in exams, but in how she can move information through the school. So what does she owe to her own house, which gave her that platform, versus the school as a whole, which needs someone to coordinate resistance? When she bends rules, is she protecting her friends or conscripting them into a war they don't all understand? The very traits that make her a perfect Ravenclaw, ambition for knowledge, relentless logic, the ability to stand back and see the whole timeline, also threaten to isolate her. She can calculate acceptable losses in a way Harry and Ron, raised on instinct and family loyalty, find chilling. When she chooses secrecy over confession, strategy over shared fear, what happens to their trust? What happens the first time she withholds information because she's decided, alone in that high blue tower, that Harry doesn't need to know yet? So, let's explore the moment when that quiet calculation finally explodes. Why this change still warms the heart. That explosion doesn't end the friendship, it pressure tests it. Because when the dust settles, we don't just get a clever Ravenclaw and two wounded Gryffindors. We get a chance to see what love looks like when it has to stretch across towers, timetables, and totally different ways of being brave. Being in Ravenclaw means she finds peers who match her academically. Means late-night debates with Terry Boot over arithmancy proofs, instead of just correcting Ron's homework. Means Padma Patil rolling her eyes, but secretly loving the way Hermione turns revision into a competitive sport. Being in Ravenclaw means she feels less ashamed of loving books. Means she walks into a common room that literally rewards answering riddles. Means she can turn study into strategy without constantly apologizing for going on about the library. It means the thing that made her lonely in canon becomes the thing that makes her belong. But because she's not the only sharp mind in the room, this Hermione is humbled and strengthened at the same time. She's not just the clever one of a trio. She's one of many in a broader intellectual clan, watching Michael Corner dismantle ministry policy arguments, listening as a younger Luna reframes cruelty as curiosity. This changes everything about how she sees herself. She is still extraordinary, but she is no longer exceptional in the isolating sense. She is part of a pattern, a house that proves brilliance isn't a solitary curse. It's a shared language. And that shared language becomes a bridge This isn't a story about Hermione ascending into lone genius savior status while Gryffindor flounders below. If anything, it pushes her away from individual glory and toward collective loyalty. Being in Ravenclaw means she learns to translate Gryffindor impulse into Ravenclaw plan, Ravenclaw caution into Gryffindor action. She's the one who carries DA rosters from one common room to another, who turns Harry's raw defiance into lesson plans, who sits in Flitwick's classroom rehearsing shield charms she knows she'll be teaching to Neville next week. So the emotional core doesn't evaporate, it crystallizes. Love of learning isn't a joke about swotty Hermione anymore. It's a through line. Love of friends across house lines isn't a side effect of sharing a dorm. It's a choice she makes every day when she climbs all those stairs to the Gryffindor common room after curfew. Respect between houses stops being a speech at the leaving feast and becomes something she builds brick by brick. Study groups that mix colors, Ravenclaws cheering in red and gold scarves, Gryffindors lingering outside a bronze eagle door, waiting for her to come down. And at the center of it, the question that holds this whole timeline together. What if the point isn't to take Hermione away from Harry and Ron, but to ask how far friendship can stretch when you sleep in different towers and answer to different colors? How much can you protect each other when the castle itself keeps insisting you belong apart? So, let's explore what happens the first time Hogwarts learns that house lines are suggestions, not limits, and that one girl in blue and bronze is willing to test exactly how breakable they are. Stepping into the story, from analysis to Hogwarts halls. So let's walk back into the Great Hall to that first September evening and watch what happens when the hat chooses differently. It's the 1st of September, 1991. The air is thick with the smell of roast beef and gravy, and something sweet and spiced from the Hufflepuff end of the tables. Hundreds of candles float overhead, dripping wax that never lands, their light flickering over polished goblets and nervous first-year faces. We know this scene in canon. We've been here before. But because we're changing one word the hat speaks, we have to pay attention to everything. Harry has just stumbled away from the stool, ears ringing with Gryffindor cheers, cheeks hot, the weight of the scar on his forehead suddenly heavier under all those eyes. He drops onto the bench beside Ron, who is grinning so hard it looks painful, and tries to breathe as McGonagall's voice cuts through the murmur. Granger, Hermione. We stay with him for a second. He watches the bushy-haired girl from the train march up as if she's answering an exam question. Jaw set, hands clenched. The hat comes down over her curls. It slips a little, wobbles, and the hall leans in. In canon, this is a pause we skim. Here, it's everything. The brim twitches. Hermione's heart is hammering. She can smell the dust in the hat's lining, old parchment and attic air. Somewhere beneath that, roast beef and pumpkin, the metallic tang of nerves. She thinks, desperately, Gryffindor would be nice. Wouldn't it? Brave, noble. Friends. But under that wish is something sharper. The hunger to learn, to know, to be where questions are not an annoyance but a currency. What if there's a place for that? The hat chuckles in her ear. We won't hear its exact words, not yet. We only hear the outcome. Ravenclaw. The word doesn't crash through the hall so much as ripple, a wave of surprised whispers chasing it to every corner. Harry blinks. Ron's grin collapses into a confused frown. At the staff table, McGonagall's mouth tightens for half a heartbeat before she gives the smallest, precise nod. Beside her, Flitwick actually claps, hands coming together in a delighted little burst, eyes bright behind his spectacles. Hermione pulls the hat off, stunned, cheeks flaming as blue and bronze banners seem suddenly louder. Closer. She gives one quick, hopeful glance toward the Ravenclaw table, toward the cluster of students already shifting to make space. Terry Boot craning his neck, Padma Patil whispering, "Curious." Then she walks, each step a decision the castle will remember. This isn't a story about a hat being pedantic with house definitions. This changes everything, because it means, from this moment on, our camera angle shifts. We won't just summarize what must have happened in another tower. We're going to live there. From here, we're inside scenes. We'll stand in the circular quiet of Ravenclaw Tower as Hermione faces her first door riddle with a thrill she'd never admit. We'll sit with Harry in the Gryffindor common room, eyes straying to the portrait hole, wondering if he misread the entire train ride. We'll trail them both down corridors, where house colors pull them apart, even as danger pushes them together. And every few beats, we'll pull back out of those dormitories, classrooms, and stone corridors to ask what it all means for the larger war, for friendship, for how you protect family you don't even share a table with. So, let's explore that first year again, one concrete moment at a time, and see how long it takes Hogwarts to realize that one girl in blue and bronze is quietly rearranging its future. A different walk from the stool, first impressions, new alliances. Hermione doesn't walk from the stool so much as recalibrate. Ravenclaw. The word lands with a quiet, ringing rightness in her chest, even as her stomach twists. What if this is exactly what she wanted, and not at all what she expected? She slides off the stool with her chin high, trying to look composed, but there's a tremor in the way her fingers clutch the edge of her new robes. On one level, it is relief. The hat saw her mind, her meticulous preparation, the way she'd memorized every textbook she could get her hands on before ever seeing the castle. Being recognized for that feels like vindication, almost like protection. This isn't a story about bravery winning out over brains. It's a story where wit and work are enough to define you. But because she is 11, because she is still the girl on the train who nervously fixed a boy's glasses and chattered about spells, there's a sting too. She had imagined, briefly, foolishly, that she'd sit with the first almost friend she'd made, the quiet, overwhelmed boy with the scar and the hand-me-down jumper. Gryffindor meant proximity. Ravenclaw means distance. At the Ravenclaw table, the reception is different from canon immediately. Terry Boot, who'd overheard her on the train practicing incantations under her breath, gives a low whistle as she sits down. "Told you you'd be one of us," he says, half impressed, half awed. "You corrected that Lumos theory in the bookshop window. My mum's still talking about it." There is no Ron Weasley rolling his eyes at her pronunciation, no muttered "mental" when she launches into an explanation. Instead, there's an almost greedy curiosity. Padma Patil leans in with polite interest, her dark eyes assessing rather than dismissive. "You're Muggle-born, right? What does that mean for learning arithmancy without any background. It's not a challenge to her right to be here. It's a research question. And Hermione, who has always been too much for her classmates, feels the shock of being treated as a resource instead of a nuisance. Across the hall, Harry watches her move away in that swirl of blue and bronze. He doesn't know her name. Not yet. But he remembers the bossy girl who knew about every spell he'd never heard of, and the way she'd said, "I read about you." There's a tug in his chest, a sense that this sorting means something. Then the hall erupts into chatter, plates fill, and she disappears behind taller students and floating candles. For Harry, this Hermione is briefly a possibility, and then a puzzle lost in the crowd. Up at the staff table, the adults clock it too. Professor Flitwick practically vibrates in his high chair, making a tiny, delighted sound when the hat shouts, "Ravenclaw!" a clearly gifted witch, already hungry for theory. This changes everything for his house dynamics, and he knows it. McGonagall, by contrast, allows herself the smallest flicker of surprise. A rule-focused, bookish girl with a spine of steel feels like a natural lion on paper. But because the hat's word is final, she smooths her expression, filing the anomaly away for later. Hours later, when the feast is a memory and the castle has swallowed the first years into its moving staircases, Hermione climbs the spiral staircase to Ravenclaw Tower. The air is cooler here, thinner, as if the castle expects you to think more clearly the higher you go. She stops before the eagle door knocker, heart racing. "What?" the bronze bird asks in a clear, ringing voice, "is the difference between learning and wisdom?" Hermione freezes. No password, no list to memorize. A question, an invitation. "Learning is knowing facts," she says slowly, feeling her way. "Wisdom is knowing what to do with them." The door swings open at once. For a moment, standing on the threshold of the airy common room, surrounded by stars and bookshelves and a low murmur of new housemates, she feels a fierce, almost painful sense that she might finally be exactly where she belongs. Not as the tag-along to a boy's legend, but as herself. She doesn't yet know how long that certainty will last, or how often she'll find herself glancing across the great hall toward a table draped in red and gold. And the first real test of which house owns her loyalty is already lumbering toward the castle, heavy, smelly, and 12 feet tall. Ravenclaw Tower, Night 1. Belonging by Riddle. The troll is lumbering through the dungeons, but our camera doesn't follow it yet. It swings instead, sharply, up the marble staircase and along a quieter path, the winding route to Ravenclaw Tower. Because while danger stalks the lower floors, Hermione Granger is climbing toward a very different kind of test. Canon gives us a Gryffindor common room, warm, crowded, noisy, full of armchairs and fireside drama. Here, on this timeline, the door swings open onto something else entirely. Airy windows stretch from floor to ceiling, black panes now spattered with October rain and framed by pale stone. The ceiling above has been charmed to mirror the sky, so the storm clouds thin and part to reveal a scatter of cold, bright stars. Shelves line the walls in elegant arcs. Already packed with books students have smuggled from home or temporarily relocated from the library. And everywhere there's that low hum of thought. First years arguing about which charms principles are most fundamental. Older students dissecting Quidditch tactics, like they're proofs in arithmancy. It's not silent, it's focused. It feels, to Hermione, like walking into a mind. And then there's the door. To enter Ravenclaw Tower, you don't give a password. You answer a question. The eagle knocker's eyes gleam, and a clear, amused voice asks, which is more important, cleverness or kindness? Hermione freezes for half a heartbeat. This isn't rote recall. This isn't something she can memorize from a book and spit back perfectly. It's an argument, a weighing, a chance to show how she thinks. She hears herself say, a little breathlessly, that cleverness without kindness can be cruel, but kindness without cleverness can be helpless, and that wisdom is knowing when you need each. The door swings open. Just like that, validation, instant and precise. This isn't a story about passwords or portraits. This is a house that assumes you have something worth saying before you even cross the threshold. This changes everything for a girl who has spent 11 years being told she is too much, too intense, too eager, with her hand in the air. Upstairs, the first-year girls' dormitory is a ring of 4 poster beds and softly glowing blue lamps. Padma Patil is already there, parchment spread out, quill in hand, as she drafts what appears to be a study schedule for the term. Another girl, a pureblood named Selwyn, is polishing her wand and casually mentioning how Muggle schools must be terribly basic, no offense, in a tone that suggests she expects Hermione to agree. We watch the pivot. Hermione's back straightens. Her voice goes clipped and precise as she explains that her primary school was actually quite rigorous. Thank you, and that transfiguration theory does not, in fact, depend on your parents' blood status. Padma's eyes flick up, interested. Selwyn's mouth curls, just a fraction. They compare timetables. There's excitement about ancient runes in 3rd year. Speculation about whether Professor Flitwick will let them practice non-verbal magic early. A spirited debate about whether defense or charms will be more useful when you know who comes back, if he does. It's still 11-year-olds talking before bed, but the tone is different from Lavender's gossip and Parvati's divination dreams. Less who fancies whom, more which branch of magic could change the world. And yet the edge is there. A boy down in the common room, Michael Corner, had already joked that some people only know things from books. As if that were a flaw, Selwyn's comment lingers. Hermione files these moments away, tiny slights pressed flat between the pages of her mind. Later, in the dark, curtains drawn, rain tapping against the glass, Hermione lies awake. She mouths wand movements into the air, silently rehearsing Lumos, Wingardium Leviosa, the complicated swish and tap of Alohomora. Her chest is tight with a kind of joy that almost hurts. She is in a house that speaks her language. She is where she thought she wanted to be. And still, there's that flicker of loneliness. She thinks of the dark-haired boy from the train, the one who was famous and bewildered and very bad at hiding it. Harry Potter, who chose Gryffindor, who is right now under a scarlet banner hearing about a troll in the dungeons. Is he thinking about the hat too? About the path not taken? What if he had come up these stairs instead of turning left at the Great Hall? Hermione closes her eyes, clutching the thought like a charm against the dark. Down below, something roars, and the timeline tilts. Classes begin. Hermione, the star pupil in the eagle's nest. Classes begin with a whisper of parchment and a crackle of magic in the air. For Hermione Granger, newly of Ravenclaw, that first week is a test she has been preparing for her entire life without quite knowing it. In Charms, the moment comes almost immediately. Flitwick squeaks out, "Who can tell me the theory behind the levitation charm?" And her hand is in the air before most students have even processed the question. Canon tells us she would have been insufferable in any house. Here she is something more dangerous. She is seen. Flitwick's eyes brighten, his whole face folding into open delight, as she not only recites the wording from the textbook, but adds a thoughtful comment about wand movement and intent. You can almost hear the quills scratching faster around her, because the Ravenclaws are watching. Terry Boot raises his eyebrows. Padma Patil leans forward, assessing. Is this the top student in their year? Is this a rival, an ally, a future study partner? In a house that values wit and learning, Hermione's eagerness isn't an embarrassment. It's a signal flare. This changes everything. The same traits that made her a know-it-all under the scarlet banners become a currency under the blue and bronze. Then we follow her into Transfiguration, where the classroom is thick with Gryffindor red. McGonagall asks a question about switching spells. Hermione answers perfectly, and the reaction is different. There's the same sharp nod from McGonagall. Yes, the same grudging professional respect. But from the Gryffindor benches, you get the eye rolls, the muttered, "Does she ever stop?" The distance between houses becomes something you can feel in the air, a quiet pressure at the back of Hermione's neck. This isn't a story about her suddenly becoming less intense. It's a story about who is allowed to admire that intensity and who resents it. Back in Charms, Flitwick invites her to stay after class. We know he champions talented students in canon. Here, that bond forms early and deep. He perches on his stack of books, feet swinging, and asks her what she wants to do with all this talent. He doesn't tell her she's clever. He tells her she could be exceptional if she keeps questioning, keeps pushing past the boundaries of the syllabus. It is gentle, but it is also a challenge. And Hermione, growing up in a world that has rarely framed her hunger to learn as love instead of annoyance, glows under it. From there, the house-based study groups almost form themselves. A Ravenclaw circle in the library, Terry and Padma and Sue Lee comparing notes, beckons her over. They trade essay drafts, argue about the ethics of memory charms, time each other on solving the riddle door. It means evenings vanish into parchment and debate under blue-hued windows, while the Gryffindor common room becomes a place she passes through rather than belongs to. Which is why, one night at the end of that first week, she leaves the library with a precarious stack of books and walks past the portrait hole just as it swings open. Inside, Harry and Ron are by the fire. Ron gesturing wildly through a story, Harry doubled over laughing, a chessboard abandoned between them. For a heartbeat, the world narrows to that warm circle of light. What if she went in, just for a minute? What if the top student in Ravenclaw sat down with two Gryffindors and let herself be pulled into their orbit? Hermione hesitates. Her arms ache under the weight of knowledge. Flitwick's words ring in her ears. So, let's explore what it means that she shifts her grip on the books, turns away from the fire, and starts up the staircase to Ravenclaw Tower instead. Because when the troll comes, When the stone calls, she will be coming from a very different place. And the timeline tilts again. The almost trio, near misses and parallel lives. Down on the lawn, a whistle blows, broomsticks rattle against wrists, and history almost happens. In canon, that first flying lesson is where the fault lines between Harry, Ron, and Hermione crack open. Here, the pieces are the same, but because one girl climbs different stairs at night, they fall in new patterns. Hermione is still the first to shout, "Up!" with perfect enunciation. Still the one whose broom snaps obediently into her hand on the second try. She still looks around, cheeks pink, half hoping someone noticed. They do, but it's Terry Boot and Padma Patil on either side, not Seamus and Dean. Terry mutters, impressed, that he read brooms don't respond as well to nervous flyers. Padma asks what book she used. Hermione lights up, launching into a precise explanation about grip, balance, and a theory of magical focus. On the Gryffindor side, Harry hears her voice carry across the grass. He watches the girl from Ravenclaw, whose curls are always escaping their plate, the one who always has her hand up. She looks small next to the brooms, but her movements are clean, deliberate. This Harry raised in a family that praises Ginny's first successful broom ride and Charlie's dragon facts with equal pride, recognizes competence when he sees it. He files her away as really good at magic and probably busy, and then Neville's broom wobbles and the moment breaks. This isn't a story about them never noticing each other. It's a story about noticing from too far away. In Charms, the Wingardium Leviosa lesson still becomes a quiet battlefield. Hermione has practiced the wand movement in her dorm, whispering the incantation under her breath until it feels right in her mouth. When Flitwick demonstrates, she's already correcting the angle in her head. Her feather rises first, smooth and steady, earning a delighted clap from Flitwick and a ripple of admiration from the Ravenclaw benches. Someone whispers, "Of course Granger got it," and for once it isn't an insult. Across the aisle, Ron's feather stubbornly refuses to budge. He glances over, sees Hermione explaining the wrist movement to Padma with brisk, earnest precision. The famous line, "It's Leviosa," still hovers on her tongue, but now it's aimed at a fellow Ravenclaw, not a Gryffindor boy, already prickling under the weight of being the least impressive Weasley in the room. Ron's irritation simmers anyway. Not at her specifically, not yet, but at the whole idea of people who make magic look easy. Harry, wedged between Dean and Ron, hears her answer 3 questions in a row. He watches the feather drift above her desk, then sees the way she ducks her head, almost apologetic about being right. He feels that pull again. What if he just walked over after class and asked how she did it? What if he said, "You're brilliant," the way his family says it to Bill or Percy when they explain something complicated? He doesn't. House tables, house benches, house doors. Hogwarts is quietly teaching them that crossing the room is an act of courage, and he hasn't learned that lesson yet. Meanwhile, Snape still sneers at Harry's fame and Ron's hand-me-downs. Malfoy still flicks insults at both of them, and at that bossy Ravenclaw mudblood under his breath. But without a shared common room to debrief in, the damage lands differently. Harry stomps up to Gryffindor Tower and gets swallowed by red and gold noise. Hermione climbs the riddle staircase, replaying every interaction, rewriting herself into someone smaller, neater, more acceptable. They are three lonely children having parallel days. Same humiliations, same flashes of triumph, same teachers playing favorites. No late-night conversation to translate those experiences into solidarity. No, I thought it was just me. This changes everything because the almost trio is forming in negative space. You can see the outline if you squint. Glances in corridors, shared classes, the way their stories keep brushing against each other without quite tangling. So, let's explore what it takes to finally bend their orbits together. Because without a troll in the wrong bathroom at exactly the wrong time, this timeline might never give us a trio at all. Halloween without a bathroom bond, the troll that didn't unite them. So when Halloween arrives, we're primed for the moment canon uses to weld three lonely children into a family. The floating pumpkins, the bats swooping through the great hall, the roast and treacle tart and laughter, everything is in place for the story we think we know. Then Quirrell crashes through it. He bursts in, turban askew, face chalk white. Troll in the dungeons, thought you ought to know, he gasps. And collapses. We can almost hear the echo of canon in that line, can't we? The sudden silence, the way every candle seems to flicker as the word troll sinks in. This changes everything, again, but in a quieter way. In the original timeline, the danger is external and internal at once. There's a troll, yes, but there's also a girl crying in a bathroom because her new house has just confirmed every fear she has about not belonging. Here, Hermione is still hurt by Ron's careless insult in Charms. She still overheard. She still went very still and very polite in that dangerous Hermione way. But because the hat sent her to Ravenclaw, she doesn't flee to a bathroom. She flees upward. While the feast begins, Hermione is already in the Ravenclaw common room, curled into an armchair beneath a window that looks out over the dark grounds. Terry Boot is arguing with Padma about the best way to brew a perfect draught of peace. A couple of second years are quizzing each other on star charts. It's all very calm, very reasonable, very Ravenclaw. She's nursing her hurt feelings with a book open on her lap, surrounded by the quiet hum of people who respect her mind, if not yet her heart. Down in the Great Hall, Harry and Ron are doing their own kind of nursing. Ron's guilt is prickly and defensive. Harry's is softer, shaped by growing up in a family where saying sorry actually means something. They trade looks when the houses are told to return to their dormitories. They both think of Hermione. They both remember her face. But because she's not a Gryffindor, there's no immediate visceral panic of, she's missing, she's alone, we have to find her. McGonagall and the staff sweep the corridors with brisk, focused efficiency. There are no 3 first years slipping away from the line, no whispered plan, no locked door with a sobbing girl behind it. The troll is contained by adults who know what they're doing, and the whole thing becomes, in the official version, a minor security scare rather than a near-death experience. Hermione hears about it the next morning, the way you hear about any school incident you've technically lived through but never really touched. Rumors at breakfast, exaggerated hand gestures, someone swearing they heard the troll from the Ravenclaw staircase. For her, the troll is a story, not a shared scar. This isn't a story about smoother safety. It's a story about what danger does when it doesn't braid people together. To Harry and Ron, Hermione remains that clever Ravenclaw girl who raises her hand too much. Impressive, intimidating, separate. This Harry who knows how love feels at the Burrow, still feels that tug toward her, that sense that their timelines are meant to cross. But there's no catalytic bathroom, no broken sink, no wand up a troll's nose to force the issue. So, let's explore what happens when the first great Hogwarts crisis passes without forging a trio, and what new, stranger crisis will finally push their orbits into collision. The Philosopher's Stone mystery, solved from a different tower. The first real mystery of this timeline doesn't begin in a bathroom or a girls' loo confrontation. It begins almost mundanely, with smoke over the Forbidden Forest and a card game in a wooden hut. Canon gives us a tidy progression. Hagrid's dragon, a panicked dash to hide it, a chance encounter with a three-headed dog, and Hermione right there to say, immediately, that's guarding something. Here, the beats are similar on the surface. Harry and Ron still win a dragon's egg off a tipsy Hagrid. They still sneak down under the invisibility cloak, still hear the low, rumbling growl of something enormous behind a forbidden door. They still nearly get flattened when one of Fluffy's heads snaps awake. But because Hermione sleeps in a different tower, the aftermath shifts. There is no scolding voice in the common room to identify Nicholas Flamel within days. No walking encyclopedia perched by the fire, turning pages faster than either boy can think. This Harry, raised on Weasley chaos and love, is brave and loyal and endlessly curious. But he does not have the habit of assuming the answer is in a book he personally can find. So the questions fester. What is the dog guarding? Why is Hagrid suddenly defensive about school business? Why does Snape keep limping? Harry and Ron speculate over chessboards and treacle tart, but their investigation is reactive, not strategic. They wait for clues to collide with them. Up in Ravenclaw Tower, rumors travel differently. This isn't a story about one house knowing everything and another knowing nothing. It's a story about how information follows different paths when friendships and staircases are rearranged. Ravenclaws who enjoy bending curfew share whispers about a giant dog on the third floor as a kind of intellectual dare. Someone heard it from a prefect who heard it from a cousin in Hufflepuff. Hermione listens, catalogues, and quietly starts spending even more time in the library. She doesn't have Harry's direct encounter with Fluffy, but she has patterns. A Gringotts break-in on the same day Hagrid emptied a vault. A forbidden corridor announced at the feast. A giant, three-headed dog stationed behind it. She pulls down books on alchemy, on historical school protections, on famous magical artifacts. No one is asking her to solve it. She is solving it because the puzzle exists. The pattern interrupt comes when Harry finally reaches his frustration limit. He has questions, no answers, and a growing sense that the adults are not going to explain. One evening, he walks into the library with Ron trailing behind, both of them visibly out of place among the quiet, ink-stained Ravenclaws. Harry doesn't know how to talk to the girl he failed to befriend at Halloween. Hermione doesn't know how to trust the boy who only ever speaks to her in class. The conversation is awkward, halting, but he asks. He admits he's out of his depth. And in that moment, the power dynamic flips. This is Gryffindor stepping into Ravenclaw territory, on her terms, asking for help. Hermione agrees, eventually, but she lays down conditions. More planning, more research, more caution. If they are going to protect the stone, because by now she is almost certain there is a stone, they will do it with a plan, not a charge. This changes everything about how their partnership will grow, and it sets up a very different kind of adventure when they finally go through the trapdoor. A quieter first-year climax. Logic, loyalty, and the final night. So when the night finally comes, they don't run straight for the third-floor corridor. They walk, wands out, Hermione's bag thumping against her hip because she has brought notes. Of course she has brought notes. Canon gives us 3 children hurtling toward a trapdoor on adrenaline and Gryffindor impulse. Here, we watch something slower, stranger, and in some ways, more dangerous. 3 first years trying to outthink a staff of adult wizards. What if that's the real risk of a Ravenclaw? Hermione, less recklessness, more hubris. In the days before, she has made them rehearse spells in empty classrooms until Ron complains his wrist is going to fall off. She cross-checks every charm she suggests against at least 2 textbooks. She insists on revisiting the library to confirm that Devil's Snare hates light and heat, not just one or the other. It's exasperating. It's life-saving. Because when they land in the coils beneath the trapdoor, and Harry's first instinct is to blast fire from his wand, she stops him with a shout. Remembering that uncontrolled flames underground could eat their oxygen. This isn't a story about 3 children fluking their way through. This Hermione mutters an incantation Flitwick mentioned in passing. A controlled burst of bluebell flames contained in a jar, and watches how the plant recoils. She is studying even as she escapes. Each room is a lesson. The giant chessboard becomes an applied logic exercise. She whispers probabilities under her breath as Ron takes his place as knight. The key room is about observation. She notes wind patterns, flight paths, the way one key's bent feather suggests previous struggle. And when they reach Snape's potion riddle, she doesn't just solve it. She sits down, she traces the pattern, checks it twice, and then, to Harry's mounting impatience, she copies it into her notes, because part of her is cataloguing the protections, trying to understand the mind of the headmaster who allowed this gauntlet to exist in the first place. What does it mean that he trusts logic enough to leave a bottle of certain safety guarded only by words? Here is the key divergence. In canon, Hermione sends Harry on alone because she believes in his courage more than her own. In this timeline, she hesitates for a different reason. What if, she argues, the very design assumes that at some point a rational person will stop, that someone will decide the headmaster has accounted for possibilities they can't see? Ravenclaw has taught her that wisdom isn't only about solving the puzzle. It's about knowing when you don't have enough data. So she makes a choice that will haunt her. She presses the vial into Harry's hand and stays behind, not out of fear, but out of trust. Trust in Dumbledore's overarching plan. Trust that the wards and teachers will still protect the stone if Harry fails. But because she loves her friend, she also sends him forward, armed with every inference she can glean about the enemy waiting ahead. The emotional fallout is quieter, sharper. When it's over and the adults have swept in and the stone is gone, Hermione isn't only shaken that Harry nearly died. She is rattled by the realization that the school's defenses were, in some ways, porous enough that 3 first years could map them. Her sense of responsibility expands. She is not just a friend now, she is an emerging critic of the system, meant to protect them all. Dumbledore sees it. In the hospital wing, as Ron cracks a weak joke about never playing chess again, and Harry insists they did it together. The headmaster watches the way Harry looks to Hermione before answering questions, how Hermione's fingers twitch as if reaching for a quill every time an adult glosses over a detail. This changes everything. It means Harry Potter is still a Gryffindor hero, but he now knows he needs a Ravenclaw strategist at his side, someone who will question the very architecture of the adventure. And for Hermione, the lesson cuts both ways. Knowledge could not keep Harry entirely safe. Her decision to stay back, to trust in a plan she didn't design, almost cost her family by choice. So, let's explore what happens next year, when a basilisk begins stalking the corridors, and a Ravenclaw Hermione has to decide, again, how far her logic will let her go. Summer Reflections, a Ravenclaw's first year report card. Summer gives Hermione something she hasn't really had all year. Silence. No riddles on the knocker. No Harry dragging her toward a mystery. No midnight chess games in a tower that isn't hers. Just the hum of Muggle traffic outside her window, and the rustle of parchment as she rereads her marks. On paper, it is flawless. Top of the year in almost every subject. Flitwick's ink looping enthusiastically in the margins of her exams. A personal note praising her remarkable grasp of theory and practical application for one so young. In Ravenclaw, where achievement is the currency, this means something very specific. She arrives in September as the Muggle-born know-it-all. She leaves in June as a name people mention when they speculate about future head girls and Department of Mysteries recruits. This changes everything for her confidence, not because she was ever uncertain about her intelligence, but because now the castle itself has confirmed it. The riddle door accepts her answers. The library yields to her persistence. A head of house she respects looks at her and sees plainly potential rather than inconvenience. But because this is Ravenclaw, the admiration is cool, respectful, slightly distant. She is the girl who always has her hand up, the one who corrects people on wand movements in the common room. Some of her housemates appreciate it. Some roll their eyes the second she turns away. She has acquaintances who will share notes, argue cheerfully about arithmancy theory, or sit with her in companionable silence while they read. She does not yet have many people who will break a rule on her behalf. And that's where Harry and Ron sit, awkwardly in the middle distance of her life. They are no longer just the boys who annoyed her on the train. They are the ones she almost lost under a mountain of falling stones. The ones who trusted her logic enough to walk into danger because she said it was the only way. But when summer comes, the letters between them are careful, almost formal. She describes her parents' bewildered pride. Harry writes about the burrow's chaos. Ron complains about hand-me-down everything. They are allies in adventure, not yet the family you cling to when everything else collapses. So where does that leave Hermione's own narrative about herself? Is she a Ravenclaw first, a friend second? She wants the answer to be simple. It isn't. She is proud of her house, proud that the hat saw her mind and placed her where riddles guard the door. Yet when she thinks back to the troll, to the stone, to the moment she chose to stay behind and let Harry go on, something in her tightens. Gryffindor calls its value courage. Ravenclaw might call it loyalty informed by reason. Whatever the name, she has already broken rules for people, not for grades. Pattern interrupt. Imagine this same girl in second year, but the danger is invisible, the monster unheard, and the victims found frozen in terror. In canon, Hermione's research saves lives. In this timeline, a Ravenclaw Hermione has a different map of corridors, a different flow of gossip, a different access to clues. A school under threat from a hidden monster will test not only her intellect, but where her loyalties truly live. When the walls start whispering about the Chamber of Secrets, will she investigate as a Ravenclaw scholar, or as the almost Gryffindor who cannot bear to lose her friends again? This isn't a story about house colors on a scarf. It's about which tower she runs from when the screaming starts, and who she is running to. Year 2 begins. A Ravenclaw in a school of whispers. So when the Hogwarts Express pulls into Hogsmeade that 2nd September, we're not meeting the bushy-haired outsider from canon. We're meeting a girl who already has a tower, a rhythm, and a reputation. Hermione Granger steps off the train a little taller, a little less frantic about her timetable, and very aware that in Ravenclaw, excellence isn't impressive. It's expected. This isn't a story about a nervous first year clutching her schedule. It's about a second year who knows which prefect will quiz her on arithmancy theories for fun, which upper year will trade chocolate frog cards for a peek at their ancient runes notes, and exactly how long it takes to climb from the Great Hall to the Eagle Knocker door without spilling ink. She has a favorite window seat in the common room now, and she's learned the quiet art of answering the riddle in a way that makes the bronze eagle pause as if considering her. So when the whispers start, they don't sound like danger yet. They sound like gossip wrapped in a logic puzzle. Heir of Slytherin, someone says in the corridor. Chamber of Secrets, someone else breathes over breakfast. In Gryffindor Tower, this would immediately become a dare, a ghost story with bragging rights attached. In Ravenclaw, it becomes a seminar. Was Slytherin's alleged chamber structurally possible within the known footprint of the castle? What if the founders encoded magical redundancies no one has decoded? Is the whole thing a myth weaponized to control behavior? Hermione listens, contributes, cites Hogwarts, a history from memory. She sketches timelines on parchment, while Terry Boot argues that the chamber is clearly propaganda, and Padma Patil wonders whether the founders' quarrels mirror current house politics. It feels abstract, distant, a fascinating historical question that just happens to be trending. This changes everything the night the message appears on the wall, written in blood. The cat hanging rigidly from the torch bracket. The words about enemies of the air. For a moment, Hermione isn't a Ravenclaw analyst. She's a muggle-born girl staring at a threat that has her name on it in invisible ink. Her throat goes dry. Her hands shake. Because this isn't a story about ancient architecture anymore. It's about whether she gets to keep growing up here at all. But because she is Ravenclaw, the shock hardens into structure. Questions. Variables. She notices which teachers arrive first, which spells they use, how quickly Dumbledore's expression shutters. Back in her tower, while others debate whether the script was conjured or painted, she's listing every mention of Slytherin's monster in known sources, already planning a research assault on the library. And as the petrifications begin, first a ghost, then a muggle-born classmate, Gryffindor and Ravenclaw diverge even more. In the red and gold common room, fear sounds like, "Who's next? And should we patrol the corridors?" In the blue and bronze, it sounds like, "Is the monster biological or constructed? And if it's been dormant, what reactivated it now?" Some still insist it's myth, a clever hoax. Others argue that myth often encodes truth. Hermione stands between those positions, personally targeted, yet trained to think in footnotes and precedents. She can feel the terror in her bones. She can also feel Flitwick's quiet expectation that a true Ravenclaw meets terror with theory. So, let's explore the choice she makes. One late evening in the library, surrounded by towers of books on Parseltongue, magical plumbing, and founder biographies, Hermione closes her notebook and makes a private resolution. If there is a pattern to these attacks, dates, locations, blood status, anything, she will find it. Whether her housemates treat this as a thrilling riddle or a distant legend, she will treat it as a map. Because if the chamber exists on this timeline, then knowledge isn't just power. It's how she protects her friends and herself. Library War Room, the basilisk mystery in blue and bronze. So when the next attack hits and the whispers swell, Hermione doesn't just go back to the library, she fortifies it. What if the quiet aisles of canon became, in this timeline, a war room? It starts small, a corner table claimed and then conquered. Parchment unfurls in overlapping layers, ink bleeding into diagrams of castle floor plans, timelines of attacks, and copied passages from every edition of Hogwarts. A history she can wheedle out of Madame Pince. Books on magical architecture, magical plumbing, magical creatures, stacked 3 deep. It looks less like homework and more like a campaign map. This isn't a story about one girl nervously revising for exams. It's a girl building a case file on a legend no one will admit is real. And because it's Ravenclaw, she isn't alone for long. Terry Boot leans over one evening, drawn first by the sheer density of notes, and then by the phrase, "Hair of Slytherin," underlined 3 times. He starts tossing in suggestions the way other second years trade chocolate frog cards, obscure serpentine creatures, spectral guardians, half-forgotten ministry classifications. Padma Patel arrives with a different energy, quiet, precise, bringing her own copy of Hogwarts, a history to cross-reference page numbers and editions. Together, they debate footnotes the way other houses debate Quidditch fouls. This changes everything, because the mystery stops being a Gryffindor problem and becomes a house-wide riddle. The trio only bubble, never quite forms. Harry and Ron feel that shift. To stay in the loop, they have to cross thresholds canon never really forced them to cross. They become regulars in the library, sliding into Hermione's orbit between charms essays and care of magical creatures readings, learning to whisper around Ravenclaw study rhythms. Some nights, with a prefect escort and a great deal of rule bending, they even climb the spiral to Ravenclaw Tower, standing under the bronze eagle as it poses a riddle. Hermione answers automatically. The sight of 2 red-headed Weasleys and 1 famous Potter in a room full of blue and bronze scarves means something. It means this Harry, is building his war against Voldemort in mixed company study groups, not just in Gryffindor's common room. The breakthrough doesn't come as a flash of wild Gryffindor intuition. It arrives as a chain of annotated marginalia. Roosters killed, pipes on every floor where attacks occurred, spiders fleeing. A centuries-old mention in a book Terry pulled of a serpent so deadly one glance can kill. Basilisk. Hermione traces the word with her quill, heart pounding. What if she's right? What if the chamber isn't just real, but open now? Her Ravenclaw instincts war in her chest. Run to McGonagall with a fully sourced report, or run to Harry and Ron with a half-finished theory. She drafts a summary, cross-references again, adds a note about mirrors and indirect sight. Every minute she spends verifying feels responsible. Every minute is also a delay. When she finally snaps her notebook shut and decides to act, the library feels suddenly colder. In this timeline, her need to verify and document might buy her just enough time to be noticed. And somewhere in the maze of pipes beneath the castle, something that understands Parseltongue may already have heard her name. Petrified in the stacks. When the strategist falls. She doesn't run. That's the thing. Hermione leaves the library with a Ravenclaw classmate at her elbow. Terry tonight, arguing about the arithmetic elegance of Salazar's wards. Her satchel heavy with books, her notebook open even as they walk. When the voice slithers through the walls again, cold and hungry, both of them freeze. Canon Hermione hears it as a mystery to be solved. This Hermione hears it as data, direction, volume, pattern. She scribbles 3 quick words in the margin: pipes, voice, hunting. Terry urges her to go straight to Flitwick. She agrees. But because she's Hermione, she adds one last step, one last check. She flips back to the page she's been circling for days, the one entry that fits too well: basilisks. She underlines a paragraph, tears out a scrap to mark it, and in that tiny delay, the game ends. The corridor floods with reflections. Trophy case glass, a sliver of water on the stones from Myrtle's bathroom, and the air goes razor sharp. Terry only sees Hermione jerk, her eyes going wide, her hand clamping around the book as if she can physically hold on to the answer. Then she falls, frozen, ink still wet on the page. This isn't a story about the clever girl who always gets there just in time. It's the story where the strategist falls in the stacks, and the castle has to reckon with what that means. In Ravenclaw Tower, the news hits like a bludger to the ribs. They weren't wealthy, they weren't influential, but they were proud of their minds. Hermione was their proof that work could outfly bloodlines, that you could grow up Muggle-born and still outthink any pure blood in the room. Now their brightest star is lying in the hospital wing, eyes glassy, fingers locked around a library book. The ones who treated the chamber as an intellectual puzzle, betting on theories, trading wild hypotheses at the riddle door, go quiet first. It stops being an abstract mystery and becomes an attack on one of their own. Guilt creeps in around the edges. How many late-night debates did they have while Hermione was actually doing the research? How many times did they roll their eyes at her paranoia about pipes and plumbing? For Harry and Ron, the loss is brutal and immediate. In canon, losing Hermione means losing their primary researcher. Here, it also means losing their bridge into Ravenclaw's collective brain, the girl who could walk into a study group and walk out with 6 new sources and 3 new angles. This Harry, This Harry, who has learned to lean on family and delegation, suddenly finds the center of his information network cut out. Who tells them which books to steal now? Who translates Ravenclaw gossip into actionable leads? Who stands between Gryffindor impulse and Ravenclaw analysis and says, calmly, here's the plan. And yet, Hermione is still planning, even petrified. The page about basilisks is clutched in her rigid hand, the mark of her last conscious thought. It's the purest Hermione move imaginable. If she can't be there to explain, she'll leave the answer in the margins. It's a posthumous act of bravery that transcends house, because it isn't about points or pride. It's about protecting children she barely knows from a monster she never got to see. The realization spreads slowly through both towers. Without Hermione actively thinking, Gryffindor courage starts to look reckless. Without her, Ravenclaw wit starts to look passive. The monster in the walls hasn't just taken a student, it has blunted the two tools Hogwarts was unconsciously relying on. So what happens when the castle's sharpest mind is silenced mid-sentence, and the only voice left answering the basilisk is a boy who doesn't even speak parcel tongue on purpose? The next move belongs to someone who was never meant to lead this part of the story. After the chamber, a Ravenclaw's reputation rewritten, Hermione wakes to quiet. Not triumphant music, not cheering crowds. Just the soft clink of a potion bottle, the rustle of Madame Pomfrey's sleeves, and the strange weight of her own body returning after being marble still for weeks. Her first question isn't, "Am I all right?" It's what happened. Because in this timeline she went down mid-investigation, quill still wet with ink, riddle half solved. The answers come in pieces. A frantic Ginny rescued, a diary destroyed, a basilisk of all impossible creatures dead beneath the school, and in the middle of it, Flitwick's voice, high and bright, and shaking as he explains that it was her notes, her page about basilisks, her scrawled pipes in the margin, that gave Harry and Ron the language to name the monster and the method to track it. She saved the day without moving a muscle. This isn't a story about the clever girl tagging along behind the heroes. This Hermione literally rewrites the script from a hospital bed, and the castle notices. Ravenclaw House had always respected her marks. They admired her color-coded revision charts, her eagerness to answer the Eagledor riddles, her habit of muttering arithmancy proofs under her breath while brushing her hair. But because her brilliance was loud and rule-bound, more than one housemate quietly filed her under grade-obsessed SWAT instead of person you want in a crisis. The chamber changes everything. When she climbs back up to the airy blue common room, there's a pause that wasn't there before. Upper years, who once only spoke to correct her theory on non-verbal charms, now shift aside to make space on the sofa. A sixth year invites her, shyly, almost apologetically, to join an advanced study group that meets to puzzle through Newt-level transfiguration for fun. Terry Boot asks if she'll look over his notes on defensive wards, because you saw something we all missed. And there's Flitwick, watching it all with that proud, misty look he usually reserves for charms mastery exams. He doesn't give a speech. Instead, he leaves a slim, ancient volume on her bedside table in the hospital wing, a bookmark tucked into a chapter on complex protective enchantments. No note, just trust, just expectation. Harry and Ron arrive in a rush of red hair and hospital contraband. Their gratitude is messier, more human. They tell her, haltingly, about following her trail, about realizing in the bowels of the castle that without Hermione Granger's brain, they are brave boys with a sword and no map. It lands differently now. They don't just like that she's clever. They understand that her intellect isn't optional to their survival. It's central. It means their little found family of 3 only works if all 3 are fully themselves. Pattern interrupt. What if this victory makes everything harder? Because now Hermione knows, viscerally, that her research can protect a whole school. So when Year 3 arrives, with Dementors on the train, whispered talk of Sirius Black, and a time turner heavy in her pocket, she's not just the girl who wants to take more classes. She's the Ravenclaw who has already seen what happens when adults miss the pattern and children fill the gap. Time travel, soul-sucking guards, questions about justice and mercy. The next timeline asks not just what she can solve, but what she should. And that, more than any basilisk, will test the ethics and planning of a Ravenclaw Hermione who has finally learned how much power her mind really has. Year 3, time turners, trust, and a Ravenclaw's burden. Time travel arrives in Hermione's life not as a wild adventure, but as a timetable. By 3rd year in this timeline, she's no longer the bossy outsider begging for respect. She's the Ravenclaw who helped decode the chamber, the girl whose color-coded notes circulate, a quiet authority in blue and bronze, which means when elective forms go out, her ambition doesn't soften, it sharpens. In canon, Hermione overbooks herself because she cannot bear to choose. Here, we push that instinct further. What if the girl who already lives in a tower that prizes wit and work decides that taking every class isn't a flaw, but proof she belongs there? She's petitioning weeks before anyone else. Parchment covered in meticulously argued reasons, she should be allowed arithmancy, ancient runes, care of magical creatures, and anything that even smells of advanced theory. McGonagall reads that letter with a familiar mix of exasperation and pride. But because this Hermione is a known quantity to more than just Gryffindor, the conversation doesn't happen in isolation. Flitwick is in that meeting. We can almost hear him, precise, earnest, explaining that Miss Granger has demonstrated not only brilliance, but judgment, that she organized study groups, that she warned professors during the chamber year. This changes everything about the time-turner decision. It isn't a desperate exception for one overachieving Gryffindor. It's a carefully argued joint recommendation from 2 heads of house who both claim her as their star. So the time-turner comes with more signatures, more conditions, and, crucially, more trust. Hermione is briefed not only on the mechanics, but on the ethics, what it means to observe rather than intervene, what it means to protect a timeline, not simply exploit it for homework. And then the real burden begins. Because the schedule that was impossible in canon is even more impossible when your life is split between 2 social worlds. Ravenclaws notice first. Terry Boot frowns when she vanishes between charms and runes. Padma quietly counts how many meals Hermione misses. In Gryffindor, Harry and Ron register the absences as distance. She isn't just slipping out of the common room. She's not there when they come back from practice, not there in the evenings. because she's revising by the fire in another tower. This isn't a story about boys cruelly ignoring an overwhelmed girl. It's about three 13-year-olds who no longer share a single center of gravity. House tables, separate dormitories, and now a secret that physically pulls Hermione away. How many conversations never happen because she is literally in two places at once, and neither for long enough? Harry feels it as exclusion. Ron feels it as replacement. Hermione feels it as failure. Every lie about extra library hours cuts twice. Once against Gryffindor friends who already suspect she prefers Ravenclaw company, and once against Ravenclaws who watch her fraying and don't know why. The question for her this year isn't only what is right, it's who deserves to know the truth and when. Is trust a reward for bravery, for intellect, for family-level love? Or is withholding the truth its own act of protection? So, let's explore a Hermione for whom the hardest riddle isn't on the bronze eagle's door, but in her own ethics of secrecy. Dementors at the gates, fear, logic, and emotional blind spots. Dementors don't care about ethics essays. They arrive on a rain-lashed train, and the temperature drops, and for a moment even a Ravenclaw brain goes quiet. Canon gives us Harry collapsing, Lupin leaping up, chocolate being handed round. In this timeline, we add one more image. Hermione Granger, blue-trimmed robes slightly askew, clutching her book bag with white knuckles, and already, even as her breath fogs, cataloguing variables. What are they? Why here? How do you protect a school full of children from something that eats happiness? Because that's Hermione's first instinct, not to feel, but to understand. While Harry is drowning in the echo of his mother's screams, while Ron is shaking and trying to laugh it off, Hermione is silently running through what she's read about Azkaban, about despair that isn't quite a spell. This isn't a story about a girl who doesn't feel fear. It's about a girl who has been rewarded her whole life for outthinking fear, and who is about to discover the limits of that strategy. At Hogwarts, the Dementors at the gates become a campus-wide research project in Ravenclaw Tower. They argue in armchairs under starry windows. Is it moral to use such creatures as guards? Does the Ministry have the right to weaponize despair? Someone cites a dusty lore of sentient beings. Someone else sketches Patronus theory in the margins of a transfiguration essay. Hermione is in the middle of it, quill flying, cross-referencing everything she can find on defensive charms and emotional magic. Down in Gryffindor, the conversations are different. They're less, is this just? And more, they made Harry relive his worst memory on the train. This Harry who has grown up with family love as his baseline, is furious in a way Canon Harry never quite manages. To him, the injustice isn't abstract. It's that something made his mum's death feel fresh again, and the adults allowed it. Hermione tries to bridge the towers. She brings explanations, pages of notes on how Dementors work, why chocolate helps, what a Patronus theoretically does. She tells Harry very gently that his stronger reaction probably means he has more terrible memories for them to feed on. She means it as validation, as data that proves he isn't weak. To Harry, in that moment, it feels like diagnosis rather than comfort. Logic that lands a little off-center. This changes everything about how she sees her own blind spots. Watching Harry's face close down, Seeing Ron's jaw tighten, Hermione has to confront a new riddle. What if understanding the mechanism of pain doesn't actually soothe it? Her Ravenclaw training has taught her to dismantle problems, to name them, to chart their causes. It has not taught her how to sit with a friend shaking beside her and say nothing clever at all. So she starts to notice the gaps, how her hands tremble after a close pass with a Dementor even while her voice sounds calm, how she can quote Lupin on focusing on a single very happy memory, yet cannot summon one strong enough to cast more than a silvery wisp. How knowing the theory of Patronuses does not make her any less terrified of failing Harry when it matters. And hanging over all of it is the Time Turner, ticking quietly under her robes, another device she believes she can master if she just follows the rules. But because this year isn't only about timetables, there will come a night by the lake when there is no time to research, no essay to write, only a hippogriff about to die, and 2 lives about to be lost. The question is, when the screaming starts again, will Hermione trust the pages she's read, or the instinct she's been afraid to name? And what happens to a Ravenclaw when the only correct answer is to break the problem and the timeline wide open? The Night of 3 Hermiones, a Ravenclaw's precision under pressure. The answer, when it comes, is not in a book. It's in the echo of Buckbeak's scream and the sight of Sirius dragged away, and in the cool, impossible weight of the Time Turner against Hermione's ribs. Sirius is captured. Buckbeak is sentenced. Harry is hollowed out in that particular way you only see in children who have been promised family and had it snatched back. And Hermione, Ravenclaw Hermione, is the one holding the single tool that can rewrite the night, the timeline, and possibly everything they think they know about cause and effect. Canon gives us this sequence as a desperate gamble. Here, it becomes an exam no one has ever sat before. In the hospital wing, when Dumbledore's eyes flick between Harry and Hermione, there's an extra beat. What if the headmaster has watched 3 years of color-coded study charts, of questions that go 2 layers deeper than anyone else's? What if he has already seen her in Flitwick's office, calmly re-deriving a charm from first principles because the textbook explanation felt inelegant? This isn't a story about bravery alone, he says quietly, with McGonagall standing rigid at his shoulder. Miss Granger, this is about precision. McGonagall's mouth is thin. She hates this. But because this Hermione has earned a reputation not just for knowing answers, but for knowing when she does not, McGonagall doesn't forbid it. She asks questions instead. How many turns? What constraints? What will you not change, no matter what you see? It's a transfiguration of trust. Gryffindor's head of house, handing the night itself to a Ravenclaw and saying, in her own severe way, I believe you can do the maths. Flitwick's influence hums under Hermione's skin as she steps into the corridor with Harry and the Time Turner. He's the one who taught her that complicated charms are just sequences of simple ones, correctly ordered. Time, she tells herself, must be the same. She builds mental checklists, positions, shadows, sightlines, Buckbeak's rope, the executioner's swing, the precise moment Sirius is dragged past the tower window. She is terrified, yes, but also alight with the terrible thrill of a puzzle that is finally big enough. And then the ethics crash in. What if they save Buckbeak and Sirius but doom someone else 3 corridors away? What if a single misstep unravels the fragile protections around Harry's growing up, his family, the war to come? This changes everything, not because she can protect everyone, but because she finally understands she can't. She thinks of paradoxes she's read, of self-defeating loops, of the arrogance of assuming you can edit a world and remain innocent. Still, she moves. They free Buckbeak with seconds to spare. They watch their past selves. She drags Harry back when he wants to bolt too soon. When he casts the Patronus by the lake, she is holding not just his sleeve, but the whole fragile lattice of their choices in her mind. By the time Sirius is airborne on Buckbeak's back, the rescue is complete. The exam is passed, but walking back to the hospital wing, Hermione's hands are shaking. Knowledge has given her power that feels indistinguishable from playing God. If a third-year Ravenclaw can bend one night this far, what will she be asked to bend in 5th year, in 7th, in war? And what happens when someone else at Hogwarts notices that the cleverest witch of her age has already proven she can break the story and get away with it? Between years, the making of a student leader. 3 years in, we need to pause, because before we throw Hermione into dragons and mermaids and Rita Skeeter's quill, we have to ask, who has Ravenclaw actually made her into? This isn't a story about a clever girl who stayed in the library and let the plot happen elsewhere. In this timeline, 1st year Hermione arrives anxious and brittle, desperate to prove that a Muggle-born belongs. She is all sharp edges and hand-raising, measuring her worth in points and professors' praise. By the end of 3rd year, that same girl has used a time-turner, cracked open a monster mystery that stumped adults for months, and quietly become the person who can move between tables and towers when Hogwarts itself feels unsafe. We've watched her Ravenclaw traits sharpen rather than soften. Curiosity that once meant reading ahead for class now means mapping out the pipes beneath the castle and cross-referencing legends of basilisk venom. Logic that once nitpicked Ron's chess strategy now reverse engineers McGonagall's schedule so she can be in 3 places at once without being seen. She's not just the smartest witch of her age, she's a cross-house problem solver who can sit with Terry Boot over arithmancy, trade theories with Padma Patil, and still end up in a corner of the Gryffindor common room, arguing with Harry about whether breaking rules is the only way to protect people. This changes everything about how adults look at her. Flitwick sees a future academic star, the kind of witch who could rewrite Charm's theory before she's 30. McGonagall, watching her juggle the time-turner and then risk it for Buckbeak and Sirius, quietly files her under Ministry Reformer, if the Ministry survives. Even Snape, in his most grudging moments, recognizes that when something goes catastrophically wrong at Hogwarts, Hermione Granger is somewhere near the solution. Students see something slightly different. In a school where you can't always trust the adults to listen, she's become the one you go to when you've seen a shadow in the corridors, when your sister's been petrified, when your friend's name has come out of a goblet and everyone is whispering. Not the head boy, not a prefect. Hermione, because she will believe you, she will research for you, and she will act. But that reputation comes with internal fractures. She is fiercely proud of her intellect, of the fact that the Eagle Door Knocker's riddles feel less like barriers and more like conversation. Yet every turn of the time turner, Every moment where she realizes a 12-year-old's logic has outpaced the adult's leaves a residue of guilt. Who gave her the right to decide which laws bend and which creatures live? House loyalty complicates it further. She loves Ravenclaw Tower, the view over the grounds, the nightly debates about theory. At the same time, her deepest sense of belonging is with the small knot of friends who keep nearly dying with her. Harry, Ron, Ginny, the ones who follow danger down corridors and into forests. What if your true house isn't on your badge, but in the people who stand next to you when the castle falls apart? And threaded through all of this are the early seeds of activism. Canon Hermione cared about house elves. Ravenclaw Hermione builds spreadsheets of wages, reads goblin labor law, and drafts actual proposals. Buckbeak isn't just a tragedy. He's a case study in magical creature rights. Sirius isn't only Harry's godfather. He's Exhibit A in how the justice system fails. Outrage in this timeline comes backed with footnotes and action plans. Means when the Tri-Wizard tournament descends, when Rita Skeeter starts reshaping the story in Ink and Venom, Hermione is standing at a dangerous intersection, respected by teachers, trusted by students, and increasingly aware that knowledge is power and power is responsibility. So, let's explore how Year 4 will drag that quiet, research-backed leadership out of the library and into the public eye, and what happens when Hogwarts and the wider wizarding world finally notices her. Year 4. Tri-Wizard politics through Ravenclaw eyes. The year doesn't open with Quidditch glory. It opens with a promise of sanctioned danger. When Dumbledore announces the Tri-Wizard tournament, the Great Hall hums in canon with excitement and fear. Here, in this timeline, that hum in blue and bronze becomes an instant, buzzing seminar. Even before the goblet appears, Ravenclaw tables are already dissecting the rules. What constitutes a binding magical contract? How old is of age when wizard lifespans stretch so far? What if the age line fails? You can almost see Hermione's quill moving in her head. This isn't a story about Hermione being dazzled by international visitors. She's interested, yes, but because she's been trained by 3 years of crises to hear the subtext in Dumbledore's speeches. When he says the tournament was discontinued due to a high death toll, her mind does the immediate clinical translation. Fatality rate, institutional negligence, systemic failure. She raises these points in Ravenclaw debates that very night. Picture it, a fire-lit common room, the bronze eagle door already having demanded a riddle about risk and reward for entry. Terry Boot is arguing that magical protections have advanced. Padma is citing precedents from old tournament records she's skimmed. Several older students are thrilled at the prestige. Hermione, hugging a stack of arithmancy notes, cuts through the romanticism. What safety protocols are in place? Who audits the enchantments on the Goblet of Fire? What mechanisms exist for informed consent when peer pressure and house pride are so strong? Her questions land harder here because this audience understands the technical implications. This changes everything about how she receives Harry's name. When the blue-white flame spits out, Harry Potter, the hall fractures. Gryffindor outrage, Hufflepuff hurt, Slytherin derision. We recognize those currents. But at the Ravenclaw table, there's a different split. A third of them narrow their eyes and start calculating the odds, the loopholes, the social capital Harry might be chasing. Another third leaned forward, fascinated. Someone has outwitted a legendary artifact. What if this is the most elegant piece of enchantment Hogwarts has seen in a century? Hermione feels the shock and the injustice, yes, but it arrives braided with analysis. A binding contract tied to name and school, an age line cast by Dumbledore himself. To circumvent that means layered magic, rare knowledge, and access. She's not just asking, why would Harry do this? She's asking, who understands enough ritual theory and institutional magic to rewrite the rules without tripping every alarm? In the days that follow, Ravenclaw conversations turn Harry into a problem set. Is he lying? Is he a pawn? Is he secretly brilliant in ways he's hidden under mediocre homework? Hermione finds herself in a minority position, defending him on two fronts at once. Ethically, she insists that nothing in Harry's history suggests a hunger for solitary glory. Logically, she points out the absurdity of assuming a fourth year, raised in a chaotic, loving Weasley family, has quietly surpassed Dumbledore in enchantment. But because this Harry, has become her case study in how love and loyalty can protect someone more effectively than any ward. She recognizes a new line being drawn: house versus friend, intellectual detachment versus moral responsibility. So she makes a choice. In a crowded corridor after the first wave of gossip, Hermione steps to Harry's side, where everyone can see, voice steady as she says, for the benefit of half the school, that she believes him, and that anyone clever enough to frame him is the real story they should be chasing. In that moment, she risks her standing among the serious Ravenclaws, trading a measure of academic prestige for open allegiance. It's the first time loyalty outweighs house identity, and it sets the tone for everything that comes next. A tournament seen not just as spectacle, but as a political and magical mystery she is now publicly bound to solve with him. And once Hermione Granger declares a mystery hers, the entire timeline begins to bend. Clues, contracts, and champions are Ravenclaw's approach to the tasks. And once Hermione Granger declares a mystery hers, the entire timeline begins to bend. So what happens when that same Ravenclaw instinct is turned ruthlessly and lovingly onto the Triwizard tasks? What if Harry Weasley Potter doesn't just blunder from clue to clue, but walks into each arena carrying a color-coded revision guide? Hermione's first move isn't bravado, it's binders. For the dragons, she raids the library and Ravenclaw notes, building a structured study plan that looks exactly like OWL. Prep gone feral. Species profiles, flame temperatures, known temperament charms, annotated with tiny flags that say things like possible distraction tactic and ask Charlie. For the second task, there's a section on bubblehead charms, gillyweed, human transfiguration risks, and obscure underwater communication spells. By the time the maze looms, she's diagrammed likely enchantments, mapped canonical curse progressions from past tournaments, and drafted a weekly timetable that slots in hex defense drills with Ginny, right between Charm's essay and sleep. This Harry doesn't become less Gryffindor. He still hates homework schedules. He still rolls his eyes when she hands him a practice exam titled Hypothetical Life-Threatening Scenarios, Part I. But because he's grown up in a family where you don't waste what people fight to give you, he shows up to the study sessions. He runs the obstacle courses she and the twins design. He learns. And Hermione doesn't work alone. Ravenclaw House is a network, and she quietly plugs Harry into it. Older students just happen to leave their NEWT level care of magical creatures notes lying around. A sixth year who has a cousin in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures drops hints about how handlers actually work with dragons. Foreign guests from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang find themselves drawn into polite, probing conversations in the library, where Hermione's questions seem harmless until you realize she's triangulating entire safety protocols from an offhand remark about gillyweed exports. Professors underestimate her, which is its own kind of protection. Flitwick beams at his star Ravenclaw and forgets to collect a particularly advanced charms journal she's borrowed. McGonagall, thinking in terms of exams, offers pointed comments on transfiguration risks that Hermione dutifully writes down, then transfers straight into the underwater section of Harry's binder. This isn't a story about cheating. It's about a girl who looks at a lethal tournament and insists on treating it as a solvable problem set. In canon, Gryffindor preparation is half panic, half improvisation. Here, the panic still exists, but it's cushioned by meticulous groundwork. Harry still flies by instinct in the arena, but now his instincts are sharpened by hours of drilled scenarios. When he faces the dragon, he doesn't just think broom. He thinks flight, line of sight, flame arc, documented nesting behavior. When he dives into the lake, his courage is backed by a working knowledge of merpeople customs and the limits of magical oxygen. That competence has a cost. Hermione's increased visibility as Harry's strategist makes her a target. Rita Skeeter's quill latches onto the image of an overbearing, ambitious Ravenclaw girl pulling the boy who lived strings. Articles whisper about a bossy bookworm meddling in heroics, about a social climbing muggleborn using Harry's fame to catapult herself into power. Gossip in the corridors twists her color-coded timetables into evidence of obsession, her late-night library sessions into scheming. Hermione feels the strain. She's still growing up, still wants top marks, still craves the clean certainty of right answers. And now, every success she engineers for Harry is shadowed by whispers that she's cold, calculating, dangerous. But because she's in Ravenclaw, surrounded by people who measure worth in ideas and execution, she starts to lean into it. Knowledge stops being just protection. It becomes a weapon she's willing to wield against a tournament that treats children as spectacle. By the time the third task approaches, Hermione Granger has become something new at Hogwarts. A student who treats life and death challenges as puzzles that must yield to research, collaboration, and stubborn love. She believes fiercely that if injustice is built out of secrets and ignorance, then information can tear it down. The real question is, what happens when that belief collides with secrets far older and darker than the Triwizard Maze? Graveyard echoes, when logic meets the return of Voldemort. We pick up in the moment the canon timeline breaks. Harry staggers back from the graveyard, Cedric's body beside him, and the noise in the stands becomes a roar of accusation and confusion. In that chaos, before the shouting has even resolved into words, Ravenclaw Hermione is already cataloguing. Who touched the cup? Which direction the portkey pulled? What curses Harry heard, what colour the light was, which Death Eaters he saw unmasked. While Madame Pomfrey checks for broken bones, Hermione is interrogating the narrative itself, pressing Harry gently but relentlessly, because every detail could mean the difference between a contained incident and the return of a Dark Lord. This isn't a story about blind belief. It's about what happens when the girl who trusts systems and syllabi is suddenly told that the greatest institutional safeguard of her age, Albus Dumbledore, was outmaneuvered by a blood ritual in a graveyard. She watches Fudge flinch, hears the tremor in his voice, and her mind jumps not to fear, but to procedures. Where are the auras? Where is the emergency protocol? How can a government that regulates cauldron thickness have no contingency plan for Voldemort? Back in Ravenclaw Tower, the questions get sharper. If Dumbledore suspected this, why was the cup unsecured? If the Ministry could ignore the signs once, what else have they missed? What does it mean if the adults she has built her world around, the professors, the Wizengamot, even Dumbledore, are this fallible? This changes everything, because Hermione's faith has never been in prophecy or bloodlines. It has been in the idea that well-designed systems can protect the vulnerable. So she does the only thing that has ever made the world feel manageable. She researches, not just library stacks, but Ravenclaw's living archive. Eighth years who remember the First War, portraits of obscure curse breakers, a retired unspeakable who occasionally visits Flitwick. She traces Voldemort's rise through old Daily Prophet reels, cross-references disappearances, and starts building timelines of dark surges and Ministry denials. She doesn't know the word Horcrux yet, but she circles the gaps. Bodies never found. A diary that possessed Ginny and refused to behave like ordinary cursed parchment. Rumors of experiments with soul magic that even the restricted section only hints at. She files them away under a mental label, mechanisms of return. Because if Voldemort came back once, the method matters. Underneath all of that method, she is terrified. Not just of Voldemort, though the image of him rising from the cauldron wakes her at night. She is afraid of a world where being clever and prepared might not be enough, where you can do every reading, follow every rule, and still watch a boy die in front of you, where family, love, and courage do not guarantee survival. They only increase the odds. And as the Ministry begins its smear campaign, Hermione feels the ground tilt in a new way. Information itself becomes contested territory. The prophet prints half-truths. Fudge calls Harry unstable. Whispers in the Ravenclaw common room weigh social safety against inconvenient facts. Obedience to authority or loyalty to truth. What if those are no longer the same thing? This Harry who is a Weasley first and a Potter second, will need allies who choose truth. The question is, when Year 5 begins, will Ravenclaw Hermione still believe the system can be repaired from within? Or will she be ready to wage a quiet war against it from the inside? Year 5, a Ravenclaw declares war on ignorance. Year 5 answers that question with pink cardigans, blood quills, and an educational decree nailed straight through Ravenclaw's heart. Umbridge does not merely arrive. She seeps into Hogwarts, all smiles and kitten plates, bringing with her a new, Ministry-approved curriculum that turns defense against the dark arts into a theoretical exercise in denial. No jinxes, No counter curses, no mention of Voldemort beyond the official line that he is definitely, absolutely not back. For Gryffindor, this is infuriating. For Ravenclaw, it is existential. What is a house that prizes questions supposed to do when questions themselves become contraband? Canon already shows us Hermione's outrage, but in this timeline, the betrayal cuts deeper. This Hermione has spent 4 years climbing riddled staircases to a common room that literally will not open unless you prove you can think. She has grown up in Hogwarts as the girl who believes that if you read enough, reason enough, and argue well enough, adults will eventually listen. Umbridge is the moment she realizes that ignorance can be policy. That power can decide which facts are allowed to exist. This changes everything. Not because Hermione suddenly becomes braver than in canon, but because the attack lands on the very purpose of learning, which means it lands on her house. She watches Ravenclaw classmates get docked points for cheek when they ask for practical demonstrations. She sees Flitwick's careful, slightly pained neutrality as he hands out ministry pamphlets. She hears whispers in her dorm. Maybe it's safer to keep your head down. Maybe owls matter more than the truth. And Ravenclaw fractures. Some adapt with a cold, strategic logic. Memorize the book, pass the exam, survive the year, and wait this regime out. Some, often those who have watched Harry's timeline twist under prophecy and politics, quietly resist, passing around old spell notes, trading copies of defensive theory texts that actually mention dark magic. A few, especially those with ministry parents, collaborate parroting Umbridge's lines because family dinners have taught them which opinions protect you. Hermione finds herself in the strangest position. A Ravenclaw asking her house to be braver, not just cleverer. This isn't a story about her abandoning rules on a whim. It's about her following logic all the way to civil disobedience. If the official curriculum is designed to keep you ignorant, then obeying it is irrational. If adults hoard the knowledge that could protect students, then the only ethical response is to share it. So when Harry, this Harry who is a Weasley first and a Potter second, stumbles through telling the truth about Voldemort and gets mocked for it, Hermione's decision to help form the DA isn't a side quest in Gryffindor loyalty. It is a Ravenclaw manifesto. She designs sign-up sheets that look like study groups. She proposes the Room of Requirement because she has catalogued Hogwarts oddities the way other people collect chocolate frog cards. She structures lessons, tracks progress, turns Harry's battle instincts into a syllabus. The first DA meeting in the Room of Requirement is her answer to a world that wants students ignorant and afraid. Wands raised in a hidden classroom, shelves lined with cushions and practice dummies, the air buzzing with whispered incantations. This is learning as rebellion. This is a secret Ravenclaw ideal, made real. A room that appears when you know precisely what you need, and what they need now is forbidden knowledge. The Ministry has its decrees. Umbridge has her quills. Hermione Granger has a classroom full of teenagers who have decided that the way you protect each other is by refusing to stay stupid on command. The question is, once you turn education into resistance, what happens when the war stops being hypothetical and walks through the door? The DA, Ravenclaw-style lesson plans and quiet revolutions. The war walks through the door in the most Ravenclaw way possible, as a syllabus. Hermione doesn't just gather the DA in the room of requirement and say, "Let's practice." She arrives with parchment stacks, color-coded headings, and a term plan that would make McGonagall blink. Week 1, Shield, Charms, Theory and Application. Week 2, Stunning and Reviving. Week 3, Defensive Transfiguration. There are objectives, suggested readings, and, yes, optional homework that is only optional in the most technical sense. This isn't a story about teenagers waving wands at cushions until they accidentally learn to fight. This is Hermione taking Ravenclaw values and weaponizing them. Paired practice is deliberate, not random. A nervous Hufflepuff with a confident Ravenclaw. A hot-headed Gryffindor anchored by someone who reads footnotes for fun. She circulates with annotated copies of old defense texts she's borrowed from the library, margins crammed with corrections to Umbridge's sanctioned nonsense. And because she is in Ravenclaw, the gravitational center of the DA shifts. Canon gives us a DA where Gryffindor energy sets the tone. Bold, improvisational, slightly chaotic. Here, the promise is different. What if you could learn magic Umbridge will never test you on, with proper notes and structured progression? What if there were mock OWL-style practicals, spell journals, and an end-of-term assessment that actually measures whether you could survive a Death Eater? This changes everything about who shows up. Ravenclaw Tower empties on DA nights. Terryboot arrives with a quill already out, ready to take minutes. Padma Patil drafts revision guides after each meeting. Even Luna, drifting at the edges, quietly masters non-verbal shield charms weeks before anyone notices. Hufflepuffs come because Hermione has built a classroom where steady effort is finally treated as a strength, not an afterthought. And the result is subtle but enormous. When we ask who is battle-ready, it's no longer just the loudest Gryffindors. It's the girl from Ravenclaw who has drilled disarming charms until her wrist aches. It's the Hufflepuff boy who can hold a Protego for 30 seconds under pressure, because Hermione timed him, charted his progress, and told him, calmly, that she believed he could reach 40. But because she runs it like a course, the cost hits her like exam season stretched over a war. She's still top of her year, still answering Flitwick's extra credit questions, still writing 12-inch essays for Snape. On top of that, she's designing lesson plans, tracking who's falling behind, rewriting reading lists when books disappear from the shelves, and spending late nights in the common room quietly talking terrified fourth years out of quitting. There's an emotional ledger no one else sees. Every time someone fumbles a hex, she wonders if she failed them. Every whispered rumor about a traitor makes her stomach twist, because if the DA is exposed, everyone will know exactly whose meticulous handwriting is on those syllabi. By the time word of a secret class reaches Umbridge's ears, Hermione has turned Ravenclaw's love of learning into an organized, data-driven rebellion. She has also, unmistakably, painted a target on her own back as the mind behind it all. When the first educational decree aimed at unauthorized student organizations goes up, the question isn't whether the DA will adapt, it's whether Hermione Granger, Ravenclaw strategist, is ready for what happens when the test stops being theoretical and starts hunting her by name. The Department of Mysteries. When plans shatter, the test arrives sooner than she thinks. Not as an exam, not as an essay rubric with clear criteria, but as a scream in Harry's head and a hallway full of spinning prophecy shelves. What do you do when the world stops making sense? When the enemy you've been preparing for stops playing by rules you can analyze? When the question on the board is Sirius Black dying now? Harry's visions have been escalating for weeks in this timeline, sharpened by Voldemort's growing impatience. This Harry who grew up in a house where love was loud and loyalty louder, has been trained by family to act when someone is in danger. That means when he sees Sirius tortured in the Department of Mysteries, his first instinct isn't to test the data, it's to run. Hermione's instinct is the opposite. She doesn't just hesitate. She interrogates. How did Voldemort suddenly gain this perfect window into Harry's senses? Why now? Why Sirius? The most obvious emotional leverage. She drags out parchment, sketches possibilities, draws arrows between vision, occlumency failure, trap. Her Ravenclaw brain screams that the variables are wrong. This isn't a story about Hermione being cold. It's about her knowing, with that brutal clarity intelligence sometimes brings, that they are missing information. She challenges Harry harder than in canon, pressing him. What if this is planted? What if Voldemort wants you at the Ministry? What if Sirius is actually safe, and you're walking into the one place the Order fears you being seen? But because she knows Harry as a Weasley first, she also knows the other side of the equation. You don't leave family on a maybe. So she compromises in the only way she can at that speed. If they're going with a plan. She outlines entry and exit routes, assigns roles, forces them to think about disguises, alarms, fallback rendezvous points. It's hasty, ink-blotted strategy in the room of requirement, but it's still strategy. She even builds in a contingency, a timed Patronus to alert the Order if they haven't checked in. On paper, it looks almost workable. The Department of Mysteries tears that paper to shreds in seconds. In combat, Hermione is terrifyingly effective. She uses narrow beam jinxes to avoid hitting her friends, ricochet charms to turn shelves into falling barriers, color-coded sparks to signal positions in the chaos. Twice, she pulls a Ravenclaw out of a Death Eater's line of fire with a wordless shield charm. Once, she transfigures a broken shelf into a tangle of iron vines that buys them 10 precious seconds. And still, it isn't enough, because the room spins, and prophecies shatter, and people don't move along the clean lines of her sketches. One wrong step, one curse too fast to counter, and Sirius is falling through the veil all the same. Afterward, under the sterile glare of the hospital wing, the prophecy laid bare, Hermione has to sit with the worst conclusion of all. They were right to act, and acting still destroyed them. The vision was a trap, yes, but the alternative, doing nothing while Sirius maybe died, would have broken Harry in a different way. This changes everything for her. Not her love of plans, not her Ravenclaw hunger for understanding, but her faith that understanding can always protect the people she loves. What if sometimes the best reasoned choice still ends in loss? And when Dumbledore finally looks at her with that measuring, complicated gaze, you can feel the next question forming in the air between them. If intellect can't save everyone, what will she be willing to use next? Between wars, a Ravenclaw's crisis of faith. Hermione walks into the summer between 5th and 6th year, with a question gnawing at her that no book has ever taught her to answer. What if you do everything right and it still goes that wrong? Sirius is dead. That sentence lands on her Ravenclaw mind like a theorem that shouldn't be provable and yet is. She replayed the Department of Mysteries 100 times on the train home. The prophecy, the visions, the way they trusted the pattern Voldemort laid out for Harry. Grief for Sirius tangles with a quieter, more corrosive guilt, because she was in the room when they chose to go. She argued, she calculated risks, she tried to protect her family of friends with logic, and still they walked into a trap. This changes everything. It's not just that she's warier of visions now. It's that the whole category of things adults say are true has been downgraded in her internal catalogue. Dumbledore's silence, the Ministry's smear campaign, Umbridge with her cat plates and blood quill. In canon, Hermione's faith in plans is dented. In this Ravenclaw timeline, it's shaken at the root. If knowledge can be manipulated, if prophecies can be bait, then what exactly is safe to build a plan on? So she does what she always does, but with a new edge. She reads. Only now the shelves she haunts are different. Resistance histories. The First War, not in Dumbledore's careful summaries, but in old prophet clippings, banned memoirs, and dusty Wizengamot transcripts. Case studies in how the Ministry failed Muggle-borns, werewolves, giants. She hunts for every time a clever, well-meaning generation thought they could fix things from the inside and didn't. This isn't a story about extra credit anymore. It's about pattern recognition as self-defense. Her view of the Ministry shifts from deeply flawed bureaucracy to actively dangerous structure. Fudge's denial, Umbridge's torture, the way they tried to arrest Dumbledore rather than admit Voldemort was back. Hermione starts to see institutions as machines designed to protect themselves, not the people in them. Hogwarts, too, loses its shine. A school that hired Umbridge. A staff that let Harry be isolated for a year. A headmaster who keeps secrets until children bleed. But because she is a Ravenclaw, she doesn't simply rage. She analyzes. Maybe these systems aren't just imperfect. Maybe they are battlefields. And sometimes you have to stand outside the walls to change anything. And through all of this, Harry and Ron are no longer just her Gryffindor friends she visits across the House Divide. They are the ones who were in the Hall of Prophecy when the shelves exploded. The ones who heard her scream when the curse hit. Their cross-house friendship, once a delicate bridge between towers, is now welded steel. They've seen each other terrified, furious, wrong. They've survived it. Pattern interrupt. Imagine that library table in the Burrows' kitchen. Parchment everywhere, and Hermione calmly saying, "We may have to work against Hogwarts this year." Year 6 will be the test of that sentence. Because when Dumbledore finally starts sharing pieces of his secret war, when the word Horcrux enters the conversation, it won't be bravery alone that matters. It will be research, skepticism, and the ability to see how all the scattered clues, Tom Riddle's diary, the ring, the diary's unnatural survival, fit into a larger, uglier design. This Harry needs a Ravenclaw at the map table. So, let's explore what happens when Hermione's crisis of faith doesn't break her. It sharpens her. And the next time someone in authority says, "Trust me," she'll have a very different set of questions ready. Year 6, Horcruxes, Half-Blood Princes, and Hidden Patterns, Hermione's different questions, arrive just in time for a different 6th year. Hogwarts reopens under a strange double gravity, Snape's shadow stretching longer over every corridor, Slughorn's genial charm pooling warmly in his office. On the surface, it looks almost ordinary. New textbooks, Quidditch tryouts, whispered crushes in the library stacks. Underneath, the war is tightening like a noose, and you can feel the castle pretending not to notice. This isn't a story about teenage drama replacing the Dark Lord. It's a story about how easy it is, in any timeline, to let romance and house cups distract you, while the real danger moves in the margins. Harry is chasing the snitch and Ginny's attention. Ron is juggling keeper nerves and jealousy. And in Ravenclaw Tower, Hermione is chasing patterns. When Harry first slams that annotated potions book down between them in the library, we already know where this is going. What if the half-blood prince met a Ravenclaw Hermione, not a Gryffindor one? She picks it up the way a healer might pick up a cursed artifact, with fascination and with gloves on. The handwriting is sharp, elegant, undeniably brilliant. The corrections turn mediocre instructions into near-perfect recipes. And then she reaches the margins where the spells live. Levi corpus, sectum sempra, for enemies. Not because Hermione can't recognize the ingenuity, but because she can. The elegance of the spellwork sits right beside its casual cruelty, and that combination terrifies her. As a Ravenclaw, she has spent 5 years being taught that knowledge is power, that cleverness is a virtue. Here is the shadow of that belief: knowledge without ethics, cleverness without conscience. So while Harry leans harder into the prince's shortcuts, Hermione leans away into older, dustier books. Her research into Voldemort's past, already sparked by Dumbledore's hints and her own suspicions, becomes an obsession. In the quiet hours after curfew, she uses Ravenclaw's resources the way they were meant, and not meant to be used. Requesting restricted biographies through Flitwick, tracing Tom Riddle's name across school records, cross-referencing his awards with unexplained disappearances and magical accidents. She notices patterns, experiments with boundaries, life and death, body and spirit, memory and identity. References to obscure Eastern European theories of soul magic that most students would skim past as academic footnotes. Why would a brilliant orphan boy, obsessed with control and legacy, be so interested in magic that talks about splitting, anchoring, preserving the self at any cost? Meanwhile, tension with Harry thickens. He waves the prince's success in front of her, perfect Slughorn praise, liquid luck, the thrill of outpacing even Hermione, and she hears only the echo of Tom Riddle's report cards. He trusts the book because it works. She distrusts it because no one is accountable for it. Is magic good because it's effective or because it's right? How do you protect the people you love when the fastest route to power runs through methods you cannot accept? Their arguments leave both of them raw, but they also leave Hermione with a hypothesis. A boy obsessed with conquering death, a diary that thought, a ring that cursed. Experiments with soul-adjacent magic scattered through Riddle's history. She doesn't have the word yet, but she's sketching its outline. By Christmas, in the blue-lit quiet of Ravenclaw Tower, Hermione has a chilling question written at the top of her notes. What if a wizard could make himself many? And Dumbledore, watching her sharpen from a distance, is already revising his final mission to include a Ravenclaw at the map table. Because this Harry won't be walking into the endgame with only guesses. So, let's explore how far Hermione is willing to go when theory turns into a hunt. The Tower and the Aftermath, grief in blue and gold. The green skull blooms over the castle, and from Ravenclaw Tower, it looks almost abstract at first. A symbol, a problem. What does it mean when the dark mark hangs over your own school? What does it mean when the safest place in Britain suddenly looks like a battlefield? Hermione is in the common room when the alarms begin in earnest. Books open, notes spread. The question about a wizard making himself many still ink fresh. Then the castle shudders with movement. Shouts in the corridor, spells flashing against distant stone. By the time she reaches a window, the mark is already burning above the astronomy tower. And what we know from canon fractures, because this time we stay with her in the blue and bronze shadows instead of racing up the stairs with Harry. She sees shapes on the battlements, tiny against the sky, hears screams carried thin on the wind. A jet of light. Another. Then that fall. A figure tipping into emptiness. Robes billowing, the impossible silhouette of Albus Dumbledore, tumbling from the height that has always meant wisdom and stargazing, not execution. Below her, the courtyard erupts in chaos. Above her, the mark grins. Snape's name rips through the corridor, passed mouth to mouth by Ravenclaws, who trust their eyes more than rumors, and are horrified to find both in agreement. Snape. Betrayal. Murder. This changes everything. Not just because the headmaster is dead, but because the man who taught her to slice ingredients with surgical precision has apparently cut the heart out of Hogwarts. Hermione's first response isn't neat grief. It's a frantic mental rewind. What was Dumbledore doing on that tower? What had he already mapped that she hasn't seen? What did he know about that question in her notes? About wizards who make themselves many? About the pattern in Tom Riddle's history that she has only begun to sketch? Even as she shakes, even as her throat burns, she is cataloguing conversations, glances, half-finished sentences. Grief and analysis arrive in the same breath. Ravenclaw Tower, after the battle, is a wake held in a library. Students cluster under the arched windows, some crying openly, some arguing in low, furious voices about what Dumbledore got wrong. Should he have trusted Snape? Should he have told the Ministry more? What was his endgame? This isn't a story about blind reverence. It's about a house that mourns by interrogating the timeline. Someone pins black ribbon around the eagle knocker. Someone else spreads out profit clippings and chocolate frog cards, building an impromptu dossier of the headmaster's life. They debate his theories, his mistakes, the way he tried to protect them by keeping them ignorant. Hermione listens, then begins quietly correcting dates, adding cross-references, turning mourning into a research project, because that is the only way she knows to keep from shattering. And in that long blue night, responsibility settles on her shoulders with almost physical weight. If the greatest mind at Hogwarts has fallen, who will carry his questions forward? Not his titles, not his legend. His questions. The ones about death and love and the magic that splits a soul. Hermione realizes, with a kind of terrified clarity, that she may be one of the only students already walking the same mental corridors he did. means when Harry finally tells her the word Horcrux, she doesn't hear a horror she's never imagined. She hears confirmation, proof that her chilling question was pointed in exactly the right direction. And suddenly the tower feels too small. Books alone won't be enough. The mission ahead will demand Gryffindor courage and Ravenclaw strategy, field work and theory, wand and parchment. What happens when a girl who has always believed answers live in libraries has to chase them into forests and graveyards instead? When the safest place she's ever known is no longer a refuge, but a memory she's sworn to avenge. The next move will drag her out of the tower and onto the road, and the first decision she makes there will tell us what kind of Ravenclaw Hermione Granger has truly become. Year 7. Without Hogwarts, a Ravenclaw in the wild. They don't walk out of Hogwarts. They fall out of it, the way you fall out of a story you thought you understood, straight from timetables and exam schedules into tense, passwords, and polyjuice. For Hermione, this is the real nightmare, not the war itself. She's been bracing for that since first year. But the sudden absence of structure. No library that closes at 10. No Flitwick to ask about experimental charms. No Ravenclaw riddle on the door to tell her, gently, that she's still clever enough to come home. What if the girl who built her whole sense of safety on syllabi has to improvise or die? This changes everything. Because Hermione's first instinct, once they disapparate from the burrow and the last traces of Hogwarts vanish, is to rebuild Ravenclaw in miniature around them. The tent becomes a mobile common room, only with worse heating and more dark magic. She inventories their supplies with prefect-level precision. Quills scratching in a battered notebook she guards almost as fiercely as the Horcrux. Food, potions, spare clothes, protective enchantments. She cross-references each with locations, risks, and spells. She starts a research journal on Horcrux behavior, tracking every shiver of malevolent magic, every strange dream Harry reports, every time the locket seems to pulse in time with Voldemort's rages. If she can't get to the library, she will become one. And of course, there's friction. Ron, who grew up in a family where you make do with what you have and hope tomorrow brings a miracle, chafes under the constant planning. Do they really need 3 contingency charts for fetching water? Harry, carrying a prophecy on his shoulders, grows impatient with theory when every delay feels like another death he'll never quite see. How many times can Hermione say, "We should think this through," before it sounds to them like cowardice rather than care? This isn't a story about Hermione becoming colder in Ravenclaw. It's about her terror of a single fatal miscalculation. She knows, more than either boy, how often they've only survived because one obscure fact from some forgotten book happened to be lodged in her brain at the right moment. Now there are no new books, only the ones she's already read, and the notes she can scrape together by wandlight. But because she is a Ravenclaw in the wild, there are also moments where her habits don't just help, they save them. It's Hermione who decodes the patterns in Dumbledore's bequests, treating the Deluminator, the Snitch, and the tales of Beedle the Bard not as sentimental relics, but as a layered riddle left by a dying headmaster. It's Hermione who refuses to dismiss the Deathly Hallows as mere fairy tale, mapping the symbols, cross-checking wand lore, and realizing that this children's story is a user's manual for the oldest magic they've ever faced. She tracks Voldemort's movements on a hand-drawn map, plotting attacks, disappearances, and propaganda broadcasts until the chaos resolves into a grim, strategic pattern. Where canon gave us Harry's instinct, this timeline adds Hermione's data. A war room wall in ink and parchment rather than pins and string. And somewhere between the third relocation in a week and the 10th argument about whether they should chase Hallows or Horcruxes, Hermione understands something that hurts more than any splinch. Away from any house, she isn't just a Ravenclaw or a friend. She has become a strategist in a war where every decision could cost someone's child, someone's family, their lives. So, let's explore what happens when the girl who once organized revision schedules now has to organize survival. And what she does the first time one of her carefully calculated choices goes catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. Malfoy Manor and the price of knowledge. The first time one of those choices goes catastrophically wrong, it's not a missed exam question or a miscast charm. It's a scream. We drop into Malfoy Manor with that scream already echoing, wands torn away, wrists bound, the air thick with fear and old magic. In canon, this scene is brutal. In this timeline, with a Ravenclaw Hermione, it sharpens into something even more specific and terrifying. Because Bellatrix doesn't just see a mudblood, she sees a girl whose mind is a weapon. Bellatrix circles her the way a predator circles prey that might also be a bomb. The stolen sword, the broken vault, the implication that this clever, muggle-born has pieced together secrets purebloods were meant to hoard. What if the thing that has always made Hermione proud, her ability to know, to connect, to deduce, has now painted a target squarely on her chest? This changes everything about the power dynamic in that room. Bellatrix doesn't only want to know how they got the sword. She wants to know what Hermione knows about it, what it means, who told her, how far that knowledge has spread. She tortures her for information, yes. But because this Hermione is visibly, unmistakably Ravenclaw, the girl who out-argued professors, who cracked Flitwick's extra-credit arithmancy puzzles for fun, Bellatrix is also torturing a symbol. A clever muggle-born sorted into the House of Wit and Learning is a direct insult to every pure-blood bedtime story about inherent superiority. Hermione feels that in every curse, there's the physical agony, white-hot and shattering, and layered over it, the cognitive terror. If she speaks, she could doom Harry, Ron, the Weasleys, everyone hiding behind shell cottages and Fidelius. If she stays silent, they might die here anyway. How do you weigh information when the wrong word means a massacre and the right silence might still get your family killed? This isn't a story about exams. It's about the moment knowledge becomes contraband. Her Ravenclaw instincts scream to categorize, to strategize, to solve the riddle of survival. But pain is an anti-logic. Thoughts fragment. She hears herself begging, hears half-formed lies about the sword, and underneath all of it is the sickening fear. What if I break and don't even realize it? What if I hand Bellatrix the key and never know? The rescue, Dobby's intervention, the chaos of spells and apparitions, is not triumphant for her. It's disorienting, raw, a jagged cut between torture and safety. She survives, but something fundamental about her relationship to knowledge has been scorched. Information used to mean control, solutions, a way to protect the people she loves. Now she has lived the flip side. information as a bullseye. Later, in the shaky quiet of Shell Cottage, Ravenclaw Hermione does what she's always done. She reaches for her journal. If she can just write it down, analyze it, file it, maybe she can make it make sense. The quill hovers. Her hand trembles. No words come. How do you catalogue a scream? She realizes, with a hollow lurch, that some experiences resist being turned into neat theories or tidy plans. Some knowledge isn't about what you can explain, it's about what you can't escape. And as she closes the journal on blank pages, we have to ask, what does a girl who has always trusted her mind do when her mind is the thing that made her a target? And when the next decision she makes could be even worse. The final battle, Ravenclaw wit on the front lines. When the trio steps back into Hogwarts under cover of darkness, this isn't a story about 3 reckless Gryffindors charging in blind. It's 3 war-weary teenagers walking into a living archive they know better than any map. And a Ravenclaw Hermione already cataloguing corridors, allies, and risks in her head. In canon, the Room of Requirement becomes a refuge by accident and desperation. Here, it's a headquarters by design. Hermione doesn't just ask, who's willing to fight? She asks, who knows the passageways? Who can cast a proper shield charm? Who's best at healing, at illusions, at logistics? You can almost hear her, voice hoarse but steady, explaining Horcruxes in brisk, precise terms to DA members, turning abstract dark magic into a clear, shared objective. Because knowledge, in her hands, is not a secret to hoard, it's a weapon to distribute. And Ravenclaw answers that call. This changes everything about the battle's texture. We don't only have barricades on the staircases and lions roaring from the walls. We have charmed stair treads that collapse only under Death Eater boots. Suits of armor transfigured into logic puzzles that halt intruders until they solve a riddle. Enchanted portraits relaying real-time intelligence between towers. Terry Boot and Padma Patil work shoulder to shoulder with older students, layering misdirection charms so that one corridor becomes 3, then none, then an ambush. It's messy, imperfect, brilliant. Pattern interrupt. Imagine, for a moment, a Death Eater sprinting through the castle only to find himself back where he started, winded, surrounded by Ravenclaws with wands raised and expressions that say, very clearly, you should have revised. Hermione is everywhere at once. One moment she's dueling with terrifying precision. Every spell chosen for efficiency. A disarming charm angled to send a wand skittering toward a waiting first year. A blasting curse aimed not at a person, but at a chandelier that will drop and block a hall. The next, she's snapping orders, directing Luna and a cluster of younger Ravenclaws to reinforce the Great Hall wards, redirecting Ginny and Neville to where the giants are pressing the line. She doesn't stop to explain the whole plan. She has already spent hours making sure other people can think for themselves. But because she is Ravenclaw, the battle is never just survival. As curses crack against stone and bookshelves burn in the library, Hermione is fighting for an idea. That Hogwarts should be a place where growing up means learning to question, not obey. Every spell she casts is a refusal of the Carrow's lessons, a rejection of education as indoctrination. This Harry who grew up held by Weasley family love and challenged by a Ravenclaw friend, isn't alone at the center. He's one node in a network she helped build, a collective resistance that can survive even if any single hero falls. When Voldemort finally collapses, silence rings louder than any curse. Hermione stands in the courtyard, robes torn, dust in her hair, and looks up at the shattered towers and smoking windows. What if, she wonders, Hogwarts is no longer the school they knew? What if rebuilding means choosing from the ground up? What kind of knowledge will protect the next generation? So, let's explore what it means to remake a school, not as a monument to victory, but as a promise that learning will never again be used as a weapon against its own children. After the war, who does a Ravenclaw Hermione become? Rebuilding a school is one thing. Rebuilding yourself after a war is another question entirely. What does a Ravenclaw Hermione become when the dust settles, when the battle is over? But the work is only beginning. In canon, we glimpse Hermione as a ministry reformer and later as minister herself. But what if those choices pass through the filter of a house that taught her questions are doors, not weapons? This changes everything about the paths she might see as possible. You can almost picture 3 offers on her desk at once: a place among the unspeakables in the Department of Mysteries, a fast-track post in magical law, and a quiet, dangerous invitation from Professor Flitwick and a weary McGonagall to come back and help rebuild Hogwarts from the inside. The unspeakables appeal to the girl who once solved Flamel before Christmas and treated time-turner mechanics as an exam topic. In that timeline, Hermione disappears into the spirals of prophecy, memory, and soul magic, determined to understand the forces that made a Horcrux possible, so no one can ever repeat them. But because she is still Hermione, she leaks change back into the world anyway. Anonymized reports, evidence-based recommendations, furious internal memos about how secrecy has always protected abusers more than it protects the public. Magical law offers a different battlefield. A Ravenclaw Hermione there is not just drafting creature rights legislation and Muggle-born protections. She is building the research to back them. She commissions longitudinal studies on Azkaban's impact, drags Goblin and Centaur historians into committee rooms, and forces pure-blood traditionalists to argue against data instead of vague fears. This isn't a story about one witch giving stirring speeches. It's about someone who insists that policy must be tested, revised, and taught. And then there's Hogwarts, the girl who once climbed the Ravenclaw staircase, answering riddles, now walks those halls as Professor Granger. Charms, or perhaps even a new subject, magical theory and ethics, written into the timetable in blue ink. She rewrites curricula so first years learn about cognitive bias alongside basic jinxes. So history of magic includes Muggle history and Goblin uprisings from non-wizard perspectives. So defense is permanently anchored in consent and community protection rather than heroics. Her activism in all these paths is stamped by Ravenclaw. Educational reform becomes her great project. Transparent OWL criteria, cross-house study groups enshrined in school policy, scholarships for Muggle-borns whose families can't afford books or travel. In the Ministry, she fights for impact assessments before any new law, for Muggle-born legal clinics, for archives that actually open to the public. Knowledge is no longer neutral. It is something you wield to protect the vulnerable. What about Harry and Ron in this timeline? Their bond has been forged not just in Gryffindor common rooms, but in libraries, DA meetings, and late-night strategy sessions where Ravenclaw logic and Gryffindor instinct learn to trust each other. Maybe the romantic axis shifts. Maybe Hermione and Ron still circle toward each other, or maybe distance and different houses mean their romance never quite ignites. Maybe Harry and Hermione share a brief, luminous attempt at something more that both of them gently set down. But because of the war, because of growing up into comrades, the constant is that they end as equals, not sidekick and hero, not clever girl and reckless boy, but three adults who know exactly what the others survived. Ravenclaw doesn't let her go either. She returns for guest lectures, mentors anxious first years who remind her painfully of the girl with the overstuffed trunk and the need to be right. She nudges house culture away from cruel wit and lonely competition toward a model where cleverness is measured by how well you can explain a concept to someone struggling with it. In her office, or her classroom, or her ministry cubicle, there's always a kettle, a spare quill, and a stack of pamphlets about muggle-born rights and trauma-informed teaching. Hermione's war is over, but her work is not. This Hermione fights her next battles in classrooms, courtrooms, and libraries, in footnotes and lesson plans, and policy drafts. The Dark Lord is gone. The dark patterns that enabled him are not. And the question hanging over this new Hogwarts is simple and immense. In a world where the smartest witch of her age chose Ravenclaw, can learning itself become the greatest protection the next generation ever has? Canon versus AU. What changes? What stays true? Learning as protection gives us a clean pivot into something bigger. What actually changes when Hermione sleeps under blue and bronze instead of red and gold? And what never could? Because this isn't a story about a completely different girl. It's a story about the same flint struck against a different stone. At her core, Canon Hermione and Ravenclaw Hermione share the same spine. She is still the child who punches Malfoy because calling Hagrid a coward is intolerable. She is still the third year who risks McGonagall's wrath to save Buckbeak, the fourth year who founds SPEW, even when everyone rolls their eyes. Compassion, a visceral sense of justice, the ferocious work ethic that has her color-coding revision schedules in 3 different inks. None of that depends on House. She still believes rules exist to protect people. She still believes people are worth protecting. Where the timeline bends is in how that belief is expressed. In Gryffindor, Hermione's confidence grows in the shadow of Harry's legend and Ron's humor. She's brilliant, but she's also the girl who cries in the bathroom because 2 boys have dismissed her. In Ravenclaw, surrounded by peers who measure themselves in exam scores and Riddledor triumphs, her intellect is not an oddity, but a currency. This changes everything about how loudly she speaks. She raises her hand not to prove herself, but because it feels natural to be the one with the answer. The social circle tilts too. Canon gives us a trio welded together by a troll, a chessboard, and a devil's snare. Our Ravenclaw version spends late nights with Terry Boot diagramming Flitwick's charms, debates arithmancy with Padma, and later finds in Luna a reminder that logic without imagination is just another prison. She still loves Harry and Ron, but the center of gravity shifts. She is a bridge between towers instead of a permanent fixture at the Gryffindor table. Her relationship with authority sharpens in a different direction. Canon Hermione breaks rules reluctantly, almost apologetically, until the war forces her hand. Ravenclaw Hermione, trained on riddles and encouraged to question, learns earlier that systems can be wrong even when they are elegant. She will still follow McGonagall into battle, but because she has spent years arguing with portraits and probing the edges of curriculum, she is more comfortable challenging the Ministry, redesigning the OLLs, or leaking exam questions to expose bias. The rule-breaking is less about sneaking to the third-floor corridor and more about hacking the institution itself. That means heroism looks different. Canon Hermione's bravest moments are often intimate. Stepping between Harry and a werewolf, wiping her parents' memories, walking into the forest on his arm. Ravenclaw Hermione's courage is often systemic. Drafting DA charters, building legal frameworks for house elf rights, dismantling blood status propaganda in textbooks. One dives into danger for friends. One weaponizes knowledge against patterns. Both are terrifying, necessary forms of bravery. And here's the quiet pattern interrupt. What if both are equally true? What if House doesn't create Hermione so much as channel her? Same seed, different soil. When you think about your own house, your family, your school, your workplace, how many versions of you could have grown from the same core? Which traits would have stayed stubborn and bright, no matter where you were sorted? So, let's explore that idea forward. If Ravenclaw shapes Hermione into a systemic challenger, what does that mean for how she loves, who she fights, and the way the war itself unfolds? How's politics rewritten? Bridges, not banners. If Hermione is a Ravenclaw who thinks in systems, then Hogwarts itself becomes her biggest unsolved riddle. Not just how to protect it from outside threats, but how to quietly rewire the way its houses relate to each other from the inside. Canon gives us banners and tables, and Quidditch stands divided into neat, rivalrous quarters. But what if one Muggle-born Ravenclaw, with a schedule color-coded within an inch of its life, simply refuses to accept those borders as real? This isn't a story about Hermione abandoning her house. It's a story about her using Ravenclaw Tower as a bridgehead. We start with the basics, study groups. In this timeline, Hermione's famous first year helping Ron with his homework expands into something more formal. She organizes mixed house revision sessions in the library because it's efficient, because it means better marks, because knowledge hoarded in one corner feels wrong to her. Terry Boot brings Ravenclaws. Ron and Harry drag in reluctant Gryffindors. By third year, it's normal to see blue and bronze scarves bent over parchment next to red and gold ones, arguing about transfiguration theory while Madame Pince glares. The DA, when it comes, only magnifies this. Hermione the Ravenclaw doesn't just help Harry run it, she designs it. Rotating partners so Gryffindors and Ravenclaws have to hex and shield together. Attendance charts that make her quietly pleased when she can prove to McGonagall that inter-house collaboration improves spell accuracy. This Harry faces the same war, but he's flanked in the room of requirement by a culture she has already been softening for years. And younger students are watching. First years see a Muggle-born prefect in blue and bronze, walking out of the Great Hall with a Gryffindor seeker and a Weasley boy, as if that's the most natural thing in the world. They watch her correct a Ravenclaw's typical Gryffindor recklessness with, actually, Harry's top of the year in defense, and the stereotype cracks. If Hermione can belong fiercely to Ravenclaw and still claim Gryffindor as family, what does that give them permission to do? It means a Hufflepuff can sit at the Ravenclaw table to go over charms. It means a Slytherin first year can join a mixed chess club without feeling like a traitor. The adults adapt too. McGonagall, who in canon guards house lines almost as fiercely as she guards transfiguration standards, finds herself in Professor Flitwick's office more often, reviewing Hermione's cross-house projects. Their collaboration, once exceptional, becomes routine. Flitwick beams at the data. McGonagall pretends not to, then quietly adjusts her own house's schedules. This changes everything in the staff room. Snape is the complication. A Ravenclaw Hermione who challenges his marking on the basis of clearly cited sources is already intolerable. A Ravenclaw Hermione who mentors Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs, who helps them outperform some Slytherins on written exams, presses every old button. Does he give her grudging respect for brewing beyond her year? Occasionally, but because she refuses to stay in her lane, his hostility sharpens, and that, in turn, pushes more non-Slytherins into her orbit for protection. Over 7 years, those choices accrete. Quidditch rivalry remains fierce. House cups still matter. Banners still hang. Yet the dominant memories of Hogwarts for this cohort are not just of who won which match, but of the DA, of joint arithmancy circles, of an unofficial war memorial seminar Hermione helps organize after the battle, where survivors from every house speak in the Great Hall together. Long after Voldemort falls, that's the legacy. A Hogwarts where clubs are expected to be mixed by design, where older students tell first years, "Find your house, but don't let it be your prison." The war is remembered not as Gryffindor's lone stand, but as a coalition effort that began with shared homework and ended with shared battle lines. So when we ask what Hermione's greatest achievement is in this timeline, it isn't just the research that finds Horcruxes or the spells that protect the people she loves. It's the way she dismantles the invisible walls Hogwarts never acknowledged it had. And that raises a deeper question for the next part of our story. When your school teaches unity, what does that do to the way the wizarding world wages its next political fight? Love, self-worth, and the Sorting Hat's whisper. Unity is a beautiful slogan. It's much harder when it starts asking questions about you, because once Hermione has helped tear down those invisible walls, she has to face the one she's been carrying since she was 11. What if the house you're in is the only reason anyone thinks you matter? What if the banner over your bed becomes the measure of your right to belong? Canon Hermione arrived at Hogwarts as an insecure muggle-born, armed with memorized textbooks and a brittle certainty that if she was perfect, no one could send her back. This Hermione in Ravenclaw feels that even more sharply. Ravenclaw doesn't just reward her intellect. It reflects it back at her, night after night, in riddle doors and study groups and exam scores whispered about in the common room. It feels like proof. It feels like protection. This changes everything. Not because Ravenclaw makes her smarter than canon ever did, but because it tempts her into a quieter, more insidious bargain. If she can just stay the clever one, she will always have a place. She will always be useful. She will always be safe. But usefulness is a cruel foundation for self-worth. When she misses a question on a riddle, when Luna outpaces her in sheer, sideways imagination, when Padma calmly points out that Hermione's logic ignored someone's feelings, there's a flash of panic. Who is she if she isn't the best? Who is she if her house can't be her entire personality? And that's where Harry and Ron become a kind of counterspell. They do respect her brain. They'd be dead several times over without it. Yet the moments that bind them aren't essays and exam schedules. It's Hermione standing between Harry and a furious McGonagall after some harebrained Weasley plan. It's her refusing to abandon Ron after an argument, sitting in that drafty Gryffindor common room until he mutters an apology. It's the way she will walk away from a perfect study session in Ravenclaw Tower to sit with a boy having a nightmare across the castle. They love her for her loyalty, her stubbornness, her impossible standards for the people she calls family. They tease her about revision charts and still reach for her hand in the dark. That tension between the house that celebrates her mind and the friends who insist her heart is the point slowly teaches Hermione that being loved isn't a prize she earns with correct answers. And hanging over all of this is the Sorting Hat's original whisper. You do well in Ravenclaw, but you're brave. Very brave. In this timeline, it chose wit over daring. Yet what if that was never the real dilemma? What if the hat was only naming two qualities she already had in terrifying abundance? We see her argue with professors, spearhead Dumbledore's army logistics, walk into danger armed with nothing but a plan and a shaking wand. That courage doesn't appear because of blue and bronze, and it wouldn't vanish under red and gold. This isn't a story about a hat creating a heroine. The hat only nudges the corridor she walks down to find the doors that were always going to open for her. In any house, Hermione was going to change the world. The only question, the one we have to answer next, is what that world looks like when a Ravenclaw Hermione finally has to decide whose rules she's willing to break to save it. Why this what if matters. Stories, systems, and second chances. And that's where this what if stops being just a clever sorting hat trick and starts turning into a question about us. Because when we move Hermione from red and gold to blue and bronze, we're not only changing her view from the tower, we're asking how much of any child is raw destiny, and how much is the walls that rise around them while they're growing up. This isn't a story about a different scarf on the same girl. It's a story about systems, schools, families, institutions that reward certain traits and quietly punish others. Canon Hogwarts tells Hermione, your value is in being useful to heroes, in doing the homework so someone braver can break the rules. A Ravenclaw Hermione is told, your questions are the point. Your curiosity isn't an obstacle to the plot. It is the plot. That sounds empowering. It is. But it also means a different set of pressures, a different ceiling she keeps bumping her head against. The Harry Potter timeline is obsessed with destiny. Prophecies, chosen ones, wands that choose the wizard. A hat that peers into your head and announces who you really are. At the same time, the series insists that it's our choices, our friendships, our found family that protect us. So which is it? If Hermione's mind sings to Ravenclaw and her heart tugs toward Gryffindor, does the hat decide her fate? Or does the hallway she walks back down from the stool matter more? The people waiting there, the table that cheers, the teacher who smiles first. This changes everything, not because her soul is different, but because the feedback loop is. In Ravenclaw Tower, Hermione's perfectionism is praised. Her late-night research is normal. Her 10 OWLs are expected. She's surrounded by peers who can keep up with her, and by riddles on the door that tell her every single night that problems exist to be solved. That's a supportive space. It gives her tools and validation she never fully gets in Gryffindor, where she's the odd one out, with color-coded revision schedules. But because every tower has its blind spots, Ravenclaw also tempts her toward detachment, toward treating people as puzzles and ethics as essays. In this AU, she has to learn that wisdom without courage can become cowardice in prettier robes. Pattern interrupt. Pause and turn the question on yourself. Where would you have been sorted at 11? And where would you be sorted now? What if you'd gone to the other school, taken the other elective, sat at a different table on the first day? Who is your missing Luna? The friend you almost made and never did? And what wars in your life went differently because you never met them? So, let's explore this Hermione, this Harry, this Ron, as a way of honoring every kid who was told they were too much, too loud, too intense, too clever, too sensitive. This AU is a love letter to the children who were shamed for the very traits that might have saved another timeline. It asks, what if the problem was never you, but the tower? And what happens to a girl, to a war, to a world, when the right mind finally finds a room that was built to let her be exactly as much as she is? From the Great Hall back to you, tying the threads together. So, what did that actually change? One girl, one whispered word, one different walk across the Great Hall. How does that single choice bend an entire war? We began with the hat's murmur at her ear. That breath of Ravenclaw would help you on the way to greatness. And this time, it listened to itself. Hermione stood up from the stool, cheeks burning, and crossed not to the roaring red table, but to the one lit in cool blue and silver. This changes everything. Not because she stops being Hermione Granger, but because her brilliance is housed from day one in a tower that tells her she was never too much at all. From there, the timeline tilts. Troll Night doesn't play out in a girl's bathroom with 3 terrified first years improvising heroism. It becomes a Ravenclaw-driven mystery. Hermione catching the inconsistencies in Quirrell's story, Terry Boot and Padma Patil helping her map the castle, a warning sprinted to McGonagall instead of a direct charge. The friendship with Harry and Ron comes slower, built through shared research on the Philosopher's Stone rather than instant life debt. But because it's slower, it's also deliberate, chosen, tested. Year by year, we watched how Ravenclaw reframed the canon beats. In the Chamber of Secrets, it's Hermione's annotated stack of library books circulating between towers. Ravenclaw and Gryffindor passing theories back and forth until someone finally sees Basilisk in her cramped handwriting. The Time Turner becomes a house project. Schedules mapped on color-coded charts. Flitwick quietly impressed by her restraint, even as McGonagall worries about the ethical lines she's willing to blur. The DA is born not in a Gryffindor common room, but as a cross-house seminar Hermione organizes with almost academic glee. Attendance sheets, rotating lesson plans, footnotes. The trio's dynamic shifts, but the core is intact. Harry is still the heart, Ron still the grounding humor and loyalty. Hermione still the mind, only now that mind sleeps under a different roof. It means more late-night strategy sessions in the library instead of the boys' dormitory. More arguments about risk, because she's weighing not just Gryffindor impulse, but Ravenclaw calculation. House politics soften at the edges. Ravenclaws joining Gryffindors on patrols. McGonagall and Flitwick trading proud, exasperated glances over one impossible student who keeps rewriting their expectations. When the Horcrux hunt comes, she doesn't abandon her tower so much as expand it. The research network she built in Ravenclaw, Luna's intuition, Padma's methodical notes, Michael Corner's quiet curse-breaking, all feed into the hunt. The final battle is still fire and fear and loss, but it's also color-coded evacuation routes, enchanted communication charms, Ravenclaw prefects directing first years to safety because Hermione once made them rehearse it, just in case. Underneath the tactics, though, runs the same emotional arc. This isn't a story about Hermione becoming someone else. It's about a girl learning that her mind is powerful, that her love for her friends is stronger than her fear of being wrong, and that belonging is not a single table in a single common room. She is Gryffindor in courage, Ravenclaw in method, something new in the space between. So when you think back to that opening image, the hat's whisper, the pivot of her feet toward Ravenclaw, ask yourself which divergence stayed with you. The DA as a syllabus, a troll stopped by planning instead of luck, a final battle won by a network she quietly built over 7 years. Whatever you choose, it reveals what you value most in Hermione: her intellect, her loyalty, her hunger to protect, her need for family. And maybe, in sitting with that, you learn something about your own tower, too. Your turn at the sorting hat. Engage, imagine, continue the story. And now it's your turn at the hat. We've walked this timeline once, tracing the way one decision at that stool ripples through troll attacks, DA meetings, and final stands. But because this isn't a story about one definitive answer, the next version really does belong to you. So, what if you took one scene, one line, one moment of canon, and resorted it yourself? Start small. Go to the comments and pick a single scene. The troll in the bathroom, the Yule Ball, the time turn a year, the night in the Forest of Dean. How does it play out when Hermione is walking down from Ravenclaw Tower instead of the Gryffindor dorms? Does she still lie for Harry and Ron after the troll? Or does the friendship form later through study groups and shared detentions? Do you keep the same outcome and just change the route? Or do you let the destination shift too? Tell us which moments you'd keep, which you'd change, and which you'd deepen until they hurt a little. Then, widen the lens. If this one what if can turn a bathroom disaster into a planned rescue, or a DA flyer into a full syllabus, what other tiny canon pivots are hiding in plain sight? What if McGonagall had taken Hermione under her wing more aggressively? What if Luna had been Hermione's first real friend in Ravenclaw, not a late arrival oddity? This changes everything, not because we erase the story we love, but because we realize how fragile and powerful each choice in that story really is. Here's a concrete experiment. Choose one scene, any scene where Hermione's courage and intellect are front and center. Maybe it's her punching Draco, brewing polyjuice, or standing in front of a terrified room to teach the Patronus charm. Reread it or rewatch it, but this time, Picture her in blue and bronze, heading back to riddles and star charts instead of the firelit Gryffindor common room. Notice what feels different in your body when she speaks. Do her priorities shift? Does her loneliness sharpen? Does her loyalty have to travel farther across the castle to reach the same friends? And then bring it home. Ask yourself, in your own growing up, what house were you actually sorted into? By family? By school? By the expectations that wrapped around you? Were you labeled the brave one, the clever one, the responsible one, the problem? If you had been placed in a different environment, with different people to protect and challenge you, which strengths might have surfaced sooner? Which parts of you are still waiting for a different tower? Because this Harry taught us that changing a childhood changes a war. Hermione in Ravenclaw reminds us that changing a context changes a girl. This isn't a story about robes and colors. It's about the lives we might have lived if someone, somewhere, had made a slightly different choice. Share your Ravenclaw Hermione scenes, your favorite what-ifs, your own alternate houses in the comments. The Sorting Hat song may be over, but the stories we tell about who we could have been and who Hermione could have been are still very much alive. And from here, this timeline is yours to keep rewriting.